You want me to leave? Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, but every person in that diner heard it. Fine, but I'm not leaving because I did anything wrong. I'm leaving because I refuse to stand here and watch you lie about people who did nothing to deserve it. She picked up her apron, folded it, once set it on the counter, and walked out the door with $23 in her wallet, and her head held so high it broke your heart to watch. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Emma's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The wallet had a broken zipper. Emma Walker had been meaning to replace it for 2 years, but 2 years had come and gone, and the zipper was still broken, and the wallet was still held together by a rubber band she'd stolen from a bunch of broccoli at the grocery store. She didn't think about the wallet much anymore. It was just another thing in a long list of things she'd stopped having the energy to fix. What she thought about standing at the bathroom sink at 5:15 in the morning while Noah slept down the hall was the number, $23. She'd counted it 4 times the night before spreading the bills across the kitchen table, the way other women might lay out tarot cards, as if the act of arranging them might change what they said. A 10, a 5, 2 ones, 5 ones. She'd move them around, put the 10 on top, put the 5 on top, count it again, still was 23. She splashed cold water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror and had a private conversation with the woman, looking back, the kind of conversation you only have at 5 in the morning when nobody else can hear you. You've been here before, she told that woman. You've been in worse places than this. The woman in the mirror didn't look entirely convinced. Emma dried her face, pulled her hair back, and went to wake her son. Noah was 8 years old, and he slept the way all 8-year-olds sleep, which is to say completely, and without apology, one arm flung over his head and his mouth slightly open, and his whole body arranged with the boneless confidence of someone who has never once worried about a utility bill. Emma stood in his doorway for a moment longer than she needed to. She did that sometimes, just stood there and watched him breathe, and reminded herself what the $23 was for. Hey, Bug, she touched his shoulder. Time to get up. He made a sound that was not a word, but communicated deeply. I know, she said, but it's Tuesday. Tuesday's bad, he said into his pillow. Tuesday's whatever we make it. She pulled the blanket back. Come on, I'm making eggs. She was not making eggs. She had 2 eggs left, and she was saving them because she didn't know when she'd get to the store. She made him oatmeal instead and put brown sugar on it, the real brown sugar that clumped together because some things you didn't compromise on. While he ate, she packed his backpack and checked that his lunch was in there, and stood at the counter drinking coffee she'd made weak to stretch the grounds, and watched him and thought about money in the way that poor people think about money, which is constantly and from every angle, and with a kind of focused desperation that people who don't worry about money can never quite understand. Mom, Noah said around a mouthful of oatmeal. Don't talk with your mouth full. He swallowed. Is it true Mr. Patterson is going to make us come in on Saturday? She looked at him. Where did you hear that? Tyler said his mom said she heard there's some kind of testing thing. I don't know anything about that. Eat your breakfast. Because if there is, I was going to ask if we could go to the lake after, like we used to. Like we used to. She kept her expression neutral. They hadn't been to the lake since the summer before last, when the car was still running reliably, and gas wasn't what it was, and things had not yet gotten as tight as they'd gotten. Noah said things like we used to, without understanding what they meant, and Emma let them land and absorb them, and filed them away in the place she kept all the things she was going to fix when she could. Maybe, she said, eat. She got him to school by 7:30, walked back home, changed into her uniform, and started the 1.5-mile walk to the diner. The Millbrook roadside diner had been on Route 9 for 32 years, which was long enough that people in town had stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing things that have always been there. It was a low, flat building with a gravel parking lot and a sign that had been missing the second L in Millbrook for so long that regulars had started calling it the Mybrook. Emma had worked there for 3 years. It was not a good job. It paid $9.40 an hour plus tips, and the tips were inconsistent because the clientele was inconsistent, truckers and travelers, and the occasional cluster of locals who came in for coffee and stayed too long without ordering anything else. But it was her job. And in a town like Delwood, Montana, where the mill had closed 6 years ago, and half the storefronts on Main Street were plywood, and for least signs a job was a job, was a job. She came in through the back, said good morning to Darlene, who was already on her second cup of coffee and looked like she'd been awake since before time began, and tied on her apron. It's going to be slow, Darlene said. It's always slow on Tuesdays. Slow is fine. Slow means no tips. I know what slow means, Dar. She took her position at the counter and got to work. The morning passed the way slow Tuesday mornings pass, which is to say it didn't. There were 4 tables before 9, a rush of sorts around 10, when a church group came through on their way somewhere, and then among nothing that stretched toward noon like taffy. Emma refilled salt shakers. She wiped down the counter 3 times. She thought about Noah's medication, which needed to be refilled by Friday, and about the envelope on her kitchen table that said past due in red letters and meant something specific and bad, and she ran the numbers in her head the way she always ran them, looking for some version of the arithmetic that came out differently than it always did. It never did. At 11:45, she heard them before she saw them. The sound came first, that deep mechanical rumble that you feel in your chest before you actually hear it, that rolling thunder of multiple engines that builds from a distant suggestion into something unavoidable. Emma was refilling the coffee urn when she heard it, and she paused and looked toward the front windows and watched the parking lot fill up. There were maybe 12 of them. 12 motorcycles pulling into the gravel lot, kicking up dust parking, with the casual authority of people who have never in their lives worried about whether they had a right to be somewhere. Hell's Angels. You didn't need to read the patches on the vest to know it, though the patches were there. The Death's Head logo and the rocker that said Montana, and the chapter insignia that meant something to people who understood what it meant. You knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds arrive. Something in the air changes. Something in the room shifts. Darlene came up beside her and said very quietly, "Here we go." The man who led them in was not what you expected when you pictured the leader of a Hell's Angels chapter, which is to say that your expectations, whatever they were wrong. Jack Harrison was somewhere in his late 50s with a gray beard cut close and a face that had collected decades of weather without apologizing for any of it. He was not enormous. He was not performing threat. He walked into the diner with the quiet, measured movement of a man who has long ago stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. 11 others followed him. They took up 4 tables, pulling chairs out and scraping them on the linoleum and settling into them with the comfortable sprawl of men who spend most of their time outdoors. Their voices were low. Their laughter was occasional. They looked at the menus. They were, Emma noted, just looking at menus. She picked up her order pad and walked toward them. "Morning," she said. "Coffee to start." The man with the gray beard. Jack looked up at her and his eyes were a particular shade of gray that matched his beard and were sharper than she'd expected. He smiled, and the smile was not what she'd expected either. "That'd be good," he said. "Thank you." She took their coffee orders. They were to a man polite. There was some roughhousing at one table, 2 of the younger ones jabbing each other about something, but it subsided when one of the older men said a single word she didn't catch. They looked at the menu seriously. They asked about the soup of the day. One of them, a man with a red beard and a scar along his jaw, asked if the pancakes were made from scratch or from a mix, and when Emma said mix, he said, "Appreciate the honesty," and ordered them anyway. She was at the coffee station refilling a pot when Gary Potts came out of the back office. Gary Potts had owned the Millbrook diner for 11 years, and in those 11 years had not improved. He was a thick-set man in his mid-50s with small eyes and the particular brand of suspicion that comes from a life spent believing everyone is trying to take something from you. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the 4 tables of bikers, and his face did the thing faces do when the brain behind them is making a bad decision. Emma saw it happening. She watched him smooth his shirt down and walk out into the dining room, and she thought, "Don't," which was not a thought she could say out loud. Sure, Gary didn't address them collectively. He went straight to the table where Jack Harrison sat, which was either smart or stupid, depending on how you looked at it, and he stood at the edge of the table and he said, "I'm going to need you gentlemen to settle up and move along." The table went quiet. Jack Harrison put his coffee cup down. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was very level. "You heard me. We don't want any trouble here." "We're not offering any trouble," Jack said. "We're offering to pay for breakfast. I have the right to refuse service to anyone." Gary said it the way people say things when they've been practicing saying them, like a line they've rehearsed for a situation they've been waiting for. "On what grounds?" the red-bearded man asked it. "On whatever grounds I see fit." This is my establishment. We came in, we sat down, we ordered coffee. We haven't done a single thing. I know who you are. Gary said it with the weight of a verdict. And I know what kind of trouble follows your kind around. The room had gone very still. Darlene had stopped moving entirely, standing at the far end of the counter like someone hoping not to be noticed. The church group who'd lingered for pie in the corner booth had gone rigid. Emma stood at the coffee station and felt the moment the way you feel whether not just hear it. Our kind, Jack Harrison said. It wasn't a question, it wasn't an accusation. It was just a repetition, quiet and even, and somehow that was worse. You got 2 minutes to clear out, Gary said, or I'm calling the sheriff. To report what exactly, Jack asked. That we're sitting in your diner drinking coffee. I won't have it, I know your reputation. Then you know we ride to fundraisers for kids with cancer. The red-bearded man said it quietly. You know we ran the highway patrol escort for the Veterans Parade last year. You know I know what I know. Gary cut him off. And I know I want you out of my restaurant. You got a minute and a half now. Emma set down the coffee pot. She walked out from behind the counter. She didn't plan what she did next. She would think about this later, try to reverse engineer the moment, and she would never find a plan inside it. It wasn't a plan, it was just the fact that she'd spent 34 years being ignored and dismissed and passed over and talked around, and she had spent 3 years in this diner watching Gary Potts treat people the way Gary Potts treated people, and she had $23 in her wallet and a son who needed medicine and an eviction notice coming and nothing left to protect. Gary, her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. He turned. His expression was not encouraging. I was the one who served them, she said. They came in, they sat down, they ordered, and they've been nothing but polite since the moment that they walked through the door. Every single one of them. Emma, this doesn't concern you. I took their order. That makes it concern me. She felt her heart hammering and kept her voice even anyway. You're asking them to leave because of how they look, because of what they're wearing. That's the only reason, and that's not a good enough reason. Gary's face did several things in rapid succession. You do not want to do this. I'm already doing it, she said. These men haven't done anything wrong. Asking them to leave without cause isn't your right. It's just something you're doing because you can. Emma, his voice had dropped into a register she recognized. This is a warning register. She'd heard it before. You work for me. I know I work for you. She held his gaze. It took everything she had. And I'm telling you, as someone who's been on the other side of this kind of judgment her whole life, that what you're doing right now is wrong. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Emma Walker had ever stood in the center of. Gary Potts looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the tables of bikers who had gone completely still and were watching the exchange with expressions she couldn't read. Then he looked back at her. You're done, he said. Clean out your locker and get out. She'd known it was coming. She'd known it from the moment she opened her mouth, but hearing it still hit her somewhere physical, somewhere below the throat. Okay, she said. She took off her apron. She folded it once precisely the way she'd been doing for 3 years. She set it on the counter, and she walked toward the back to get her things. She didn't cry until she got outside. She stood in the gravel parking lot at 12:08 in the afternoon and breathed the cold Montana air, and let herself have exactly 90 seconds of falling apart, because 90 seconds was all she could afford. She had no job. She had $23. Noah's medication needed to be refilled by Friday. She had 4 days until the landlord's deadline. She pulled out her phone and called the school to make sure Noah's after-school pickup was arranged with a neighbor, because she needed to be able to think, and she couldn't do that if she was worried about pickup. The neighbor, Mrs. Giordano, said, of course, bring him by whenever. Emma thanked her and meant it in a way she couldn't fully express. Then she stood in the parking lot and tried to figure out what to do next. She heard the diner door open behind her. Hey, she turned. It was Jack Harrison standing in the doorway with both hands in the pockets of his jacket, not advancing, just standing there. She waited. What he did wasn't right, Jack said. No, she agreed. It wasn't. What you did, he paused, seemed to choose the next words carefully. That was something. Emma looked at him. She was tired and the cold was getting through her jacket, and she had $23, and she really couldn't afford to fall apart again, so she said the first honest thing that came to her. I don't feel like it was something. I feel like I just got fired. Something moved in his expression. Yeah, he said. I expect so. She shifted her weight. Were you planning to eat somewhere else? There's a place in Breckett about 12 miles up. It's not. We'll figure it out. He was still watching her. You gonna be all right? She almost laughed. Instead, she said, I'll manage, because it was what she always said, and it was true enough in the way that things can be true without being completely true. He nodded slowly. He looked like he was about to say something else, and then reconsidered. Take care of yourself, he said finally. You too, she said, and she started the walk home. She walked the mile and a half back in the cold, and she made herself be practical, because practical was the only thing she had left. She ran through every option she could think of. There was the bus station on the edge of town that had a help wanted sign in the window, but those positions went to high school kids, and she knew it. There was the cleaning service that took contracts in the county, but they had a waiting list. She had a CNA certification from 7 years ago that had lapsed and would cost $400 to renew. $400. She did not have $400. She had 23. She got home and sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and went through the job listings for the county with the particular desperation of someone who knows the listings by heart, because she'd been checking them since before things got bad. Nothing had changed since yesterday. Nothing was going to change by magic in the next 4 days. She called her sister in Portland, and the call went to voicemail, and she didn't leave a message because she didn't know what to say. She called the utility company and explained her situation to a woman named Brianna, who was very kind and very clear that the rules were the rules, and the rules were that the service would be disconnected in 8 days if the balance wasn't paid. She hung up and sat in the silence of the kitchen. Noah came home at 4, delivered by Mrs. Giordano, who was 71 years old and walked with a cane and had the eyes of someone who understood things without being told them. She looked at Emma for just a moment too long before she left, which meant she'd seen something in Emma's face, and Emma was grateful that the old woman had the dignity not to say anything about it. How was school? Emma asked. It was okay. Noah dropped his backpack. Tyler says there's no Saturday testing thing. His mom was wrong. Good to know. What's for dinner? She'd been turning this over since the walk home. She had the $23. She had some pasta in the cabinet, half a jar of marinara, a can of beans. She could make dinner. She could make dinner tonight and tomorrow night, and possibly the night after that, before she was looking at the 23 and deciding whether it went to food or to something else. Pasta, she said. Again, pasta is a complete food group, Noah. Mrs. Patterson says food groups don't work like that. Mrs. Patterson can come cook something then. He laughed, which was the whole point. She made pasta with the marinara and put a can of white beans in it, which was a trick she'd learned when money first got tight, because beans were protein, and protein kept you full, and they ate at the kitchen table, and Noah told her about his day in the specific, elaborate, completely nonlinear way 8-year-olds tell you about their days, jumping from a thing that happened at lunch to something his friend said 3 weeks ago, to a question about whether sharks sleep. And she followed every thread and asked questions and laughed where she was supposed to laugh. And the whole time she was running numbers in her head. After dinner, after dishes, after she'd made sure his homework was done and his bag was packed and his teeth were brushed, she tucked him in. He was already halfway asleep when she pulled the blanket up. Mom, he said. Are we okay? She smoothed his hair back. She thought about $23 and eviction notices and medication that needed refilling and a job she no longer had. She thought about 12 bikers in a parking lot and a man with a gray beard who'd looked at her like she'd done something that mattered. Yes, she said. We're okay. He was asleep before she turned the light off. She sat at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of her and didn't cry because she'd already done that, and crying hadn't changed the numbers. She looked at her phone. She looked at the bills. She looked at the $23 she'd laid out flat like evidence of something. She had submitted her name to the state job board before Noah got home. She'd sent 3 emails to businesses in the county. She'd called the hospital in Breckett about an entry-level admin position she'd seen listed last week and been told the position was already filled. She picked up a pen and a piece of paper and wrote down every possible source of income she could think of, including things that weren't realistic, because sometimes making the list was the thing that kept you from drowning. She wrote cleaning service, waitressing in Breckett, selling plasma, selling the car. The car was worth maybe $400, and without it, she couldn't get to Breckett, for any kind of work, and so the car was the last thing on the list, but it was on the list. She looked at the list. She put the pen down. She thought about the moment in the diner, Gary's face and the cold certainty of it, the way he'd said, "You're done," without a single second of hesitation. Like he'd been waiting, like it had been waiting to happen for a while, and she'd simply given him the occasion. She thought about Jack Harrison in the parking lot. What you did was something. It hadn't felt like something. It had felt like the only thing she could do in that moment, which was different. The only thing she could do, and the right thing are not always the same thing, but sometimes they line up. And when they do, you don't feel brave. You feel just barely upright. You feel like someone who put one foot in front of the other, and then the ground disappeared. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. Montana area code, but not one she recognized. She almost didn't answer. She was tired and it was late, and she didn't have the energy for a wrong number. She answered, "Hello, this Emma Walker." A woman's voice, low, efficient. "It is. Who's this?" "Name's Rita Valdez. I'm with the Hells Angels Breckett chapter. You worked at the Millbrook Diner." Emma went very still. "Yes. We heard what happened today." A silence that Emma didn't fill. "I'm not calling to scare you," Rita said as if she'd read the silence correctly. "I'm calling because Jack Harrod contacted me about 2 hours ago. He told me what you did, what it cost you." "It was the right thing to do," Emma said, and it came out quieter than she meant it to. "Yeah, it was." A pause. "There are a few people who want to know if there's anything you need." Emma looked at the bills on the table. She looked at the $23. She looked at the list she'd written. "I'm okay," she said, because it was the thing she always said, the groove she always fell into, the answer that didn't require her to be vulnerable at 10:45 at night with a stranger on the phone. "That's fine," Rita said. "Oh, man, I'll pass that along, but I'm going to give you my number. And if that changes, I'd ask that you call." Emma wrote the number down on the same piece of paper as the list. After she hung up, she sat for a long time looking at that piece of paper. 2 things on the same page, every option she had, and a phone number from someone she didn't know. She thought about what it meant that a stranger was calling her at night to ask if she needed something. She thought about what it meant that the first person to ask in longer than she could remember was someone she'd helped by accident. She thought about Noah asking, "Are we okay?" and herself saying yes without knowing if it was true. She folded the paper carefully and put it in the wallet with the broken zipper and held together by a rubber band. Then she turned off the lights. The next morning, she was at the kitchen table by 6 with her laptop and her coffee, and a mission, because desperation has a way of clarifying what actually matters. She sent 8 job applications before Noah woke up. She called the cleaning service and left a message that was specific and professional and did not betray the fact that her hands were slightly unsteady when she made the call. Noah came downstairs in his pajamas and found her at the table and said, "You're up early." And she said, "I had things to do." And he accepted this the way children accept things when the explanation is delivered with enough confidence. She got him breakfast. She got him to school. She walked the 1.5 miles back in the cold and stopped at the gas station to look at the help wanted sign, which said, "PTA position, must have valid license and no felonies." And she went inside and asked about it, and the man behind the counter, a teenager named Tyler, who was most certainly related to Noah's friend Tyler, said the position was 20 hours a week at $8.50 an hour, and she could start the paperwork now if she wanted. She did the math. It wasn't enough, but it was something. She filled out the paperwork. When she got home, there was a car she didn't recognize parked in front of the house. A black sedan, late model, engine off. She stopped on the sidewalk. The car door opened. The man who got out was not Jack Harrison. He was younger, maybe 40, with a Hells Angels vest over a canvas jacket, and the kind of deliberate calmness that people learn rather than have naturally. "Ms. Walker," he said, not a question. "Yes." "My name's Danny. I ride with the Montana chapter. Jack Harrison asked me to stop by." He held up a hand. "I'm not here to pressure you into anything. Jack said you told Rita you were okay." "I am okay." "He thought you might say that. Something like amusement, not unkind. He also asked me to give you something." He reached into his jacket. Emma's whole body went tense. He pulled out an envelope. He held it out toward her, not stepping closer. She looked at it, then at him. "What is that grocery store gift card?" he said, and a note from Jack. She stared at the envelope for a moment that stretched. Then she walked forward and took it. It was heavier than a card. She could feel the note folded inside. I didn't do what I did for. He knows that, Danny said. That's in the note. He knows. He stepped back toward the car. He also said to tell you you're not asking for anything. This is just what we do. He got back in the car and drove away, and Emma stood on the sidewalk holding the envelope and feeling something she didn't have a name for, which was the sensation of being seen by people who had no reason to look. She sat at the kitchen table and opened the note. Jack Harrison's handwriting was large and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who learned to write with real intention rather than speed. Ms. Walker, you don't know us. We don't know you. But what you did yesterday in that diner was one of the most decent things I've seen a stranger do in a long time, and it cost you something real. That matters to us. The card is for groceries. Don't let the grocery store situation be a thing you're managing alone when it doesn't have to be. I don't know your circumstances, and I'm not asking. But if you need anything else, anything real, anything that makes a difference, I want you to call Rita. Not because we're owed anything, because somebody helped me when I had nothing, and I never forgot it. Jack Harrison. She read it twice. She put it flat on the table. She pressed her hand over it for a moment, like she was feeling for a heartbeat. Then she opened the envelope. The gift card was for $300. Emma sat in her kitchen at 10:22 in the morning and put her face in her hands and let herself feel the thing she'd been holding back for 4 months, which was not grief exactly, and not fear exactly, but something that included both of them. The thing you feel when you have been holding yourself up alone for so long that the first time someone offers to share the weight, you can't stop shaking. She let herself feel it for 5 minutes. Then she wiped her face. Then she got up and started making a list of what she needed from the grocery store. That afternoon, the landlord came. His name was Roger Lund, and he was 64 years old, and he had the uncomfortable face of a man who does not enjoy delivering bad news, but has delivered enough of it that he's gotten efficient about it. He knocked at 2:30, and Emma answered the door with the particular composure of someone who has been expecting a thing and has prepared for it. Emma, he said, Roger, I'm sorry to do this. He looked genuinely sorry, but I've got to give you formal notice, 30 days. I know. If you can get me something in the next 2 weeks, I know, Roger, I'm working on it. He stood on her porch with the paper in his hand, looking like he wanted to offer her something and didn't know what. I heard about the diner, he said finally. Word gets around. I'm sorry about that too. She took the paper. She looked at it. She folded it and held it at her side. I'll figure it out, she said. After he left, she sat back down at the kitchen table with the eviction notice on one side and Jack Harrison's letter on the other and the $300 gift card in between, and she looked at all three for a long time. She thought about what it meant to be a person who stood up in a moment that cost her something. She thought about what it meant that the standing up had sent something moving in a direction she couldn't see yet. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to Rita Valdez's number. She looked at it for a long moment. She did not call it, not yet, but she didn't delete it either. She set the phone face down on the table. Outside, the cold Montana afternoon was doing the things cold Montana afternoons do, the light going gray and the wind picking up and the day moving toward evening without asking anyone's permission. In 2 hours, Noah would need to be picked up from Mrs. Giordano's. In 4 hours, she would need to make dinner from the groceries she'd bought with the card. In 30 days, she would need to have found a way to keep the roof over their heads. None of those problems were solved. But $300 was in her wallet instead of 23. And somewhere in that gap between 23 and 300, between alone and not quite alone, between the woman who folded her apron and walked out of the diner and the woman sitting at this kitchen table, something had shifted. She couldn't name it yet, but she could feel it. And feeling it, she realized, was the thing that made the difference between a woman who gives up and a woman who doesn't. She picked up her pen. She started writing a new list. The list she made that night had 11 items on it. Not 11 things she needed, 11 things she was going to do. There was a difference, and Emma Walker had learned the difference the hard way, somewhere between the second overdue notice and the third job that didn't work out. In the morning, she'd stood in the bathroom at 5:15 and had that conversation with the woman in the mirror. Needing things was passive. It was the condition of her life. Doing things was the only variable she could control, and she controlled it the way you control the wheel of a car on ice, which is carefully and without sudden movements, and with the full understanding that control is partly illusion. Item 1, follow up on the gas station application. Item 2, call the hospital in Beckett again about whether any other positions had opened. Item 3, contact the school district about the teacher's aide posting she'd seen listed in September and assumed was gone. Item 4 through 11 were variations on the same theme, which was leave no door unlocked. She fell asleep at the table. She woke at 2 in the morning with her cheek on the paper and a crick in her neck and the kitchen light still on, and she sat up and blinked and looked at the list and the eviction notice and Jack Harrison's letter. All three of them still there, evidence of a day that had genuinely happened. And she thought, okay, the way you think, okay, when you mean, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep moving anyway. She went to bed. She was up at 5:15 to go. The gas station called her back before 8. It was Tyler again, the kid behind the counter, and he sounded like he'd been awake for approximately 40 minutes and was not pleased about it. He told her the position was 20 hours to start and they'd see about expanding it. And she said that was fine, and he said she could come in Thursday to do the formal orientation. And she said she'd be there, and when she hung up, she stood in the kitchen and let herself feel the small, specific relief of one thing going right. 20 hours a week at $8.50 was not enough. She knew that. She'd known it when she filled out the paperwork. But it was a number that existed in the real world and not just in her head, and real numbers were something you could work with. She got Noah to school. She called the hospital in Beckett and was told again that there were no open positions. But this time the woman on the phone who identified herself as Glennis said there was a per diem list and did Emma want to be on it. Emma said yes and gave her information and thanked Glennis with a sincerity that Glennis probably didn't expect from someone making a cold call at 8:30 in the morning. She was in the middle of her third call to school district when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail, finished the call, which ended with the information that the teacher's aide position had been filled, but she could apply for the substitute list. She applied for the substitute list. Then she listened to the voicemail. It was a man's voice, not Jack Harrison's, someone younger. He said his name was Marcus, and he was a friend of Jack's, and he'd heard about her situation through Rita, and he ran a small contracting operation in the county, and he was looking for someone to do his office scheduling and invoicing part-time. Could be done remotely. Did she want to talk about it? Emma played the message twice. Then she sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she called back. Marcus Webb turned out to be 38 years old and direct in the way that people who work with their hands tend to be direct meaning. He said what he meant without preamble and expected the same in return. He explained that he had 4 crews operating in 2 counties, and his scheduling was a disaster, and his invoicing was worse. And the last person who'd handled it for him had moved to Spokane in October, and he hadn't replaced her yet, and it was costing him money in missed billing. "What are you paying?" Emma asked. She heard him pause just briefly, which she thought was either surprise or appreciation. 14 an hour, he said. 15 if you're as organized as Jack says you are. Jack doesn't know me. He knows you kept your head in a situation where most people would have lost it. He says you've got a son who needs medication and a landlord who's breathing down your neck, which tells me you're not the kind of person who forgets a deadline. Emma thought about this. 15 hours a week to start. 20 if we work well together. When would you need someone? Yesterday, he said, and she could hear him smiling. But Thursday would do. She had gas station orientation on Thursday morning. She told Marcus she could do Thursday afternoon, and he said fine and gave her the address of his office, which was in Beckett, and told her to bring whatever she used to keep herself organized. She said, "I use a legal pad." He said, "Perfect." After she hung up, she sat in the quiet of the kitchen and let herself do the math. Part-time gas station, 20 hours, $8.50. Part-time admin for Marcus, 20 hours, $15. 40 hours of work. Money that if it held would cover the rent and the utility and the medication and leave something not much, but something in between. It wasn't stability, but it was the architecture of stability which was different. She picked up the pen and crossed off 2 items on the list. What she didn't expect was for the diner to come back into it. She was at Mrs. Giordano's picking up Noah that afternoon when the old woman who was making tea and had her back to Emma said without turning around, "I heard about what happened at Gary Potts's place." Emma took the mug she was offered. "News travels. In Delwood, news travels the speed of light." Mrs. Giordano sat across from her at the kitchen table. She was 71 and had been a school librarian for 30 years, and had the particular quality of stillness that comes from spending decades helping people find what they were looking for. You stood up for some bikers. I stood up for what was right. Gary Potts has been what he is for 30 years. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Nobody ever said a word. Somebody should have. The old woman looked at her with the eyes Emma had noticed before the ones that understood things. You lost your job over it. Yes. No regrets. Emma thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. She thought about the moment she took off her apron and about the walk home in the cold and the $23 on the table and Noah asking, "Are we okay?" and herself saying yes into the dark of his room. No, she said. Not about that part. Mrs. Giordano nodded slowly. The bikers came back, she said. Emma went still. What? Not to the diner, around town. The old woman wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. A few of them came through yesterday, and again today. I saw two of them at the hardware store this morning. Big man with a red beard was asking Hector about what kind of help a single mother in town might need if she was in trouble with her landlord. Emma set her mug down. Hector didn't know who they meant at first. Mrs. Giordano continued with the evenness of someone delivering information she's already processed. And then he figured it out. He told them about the rent situation. I don't know if he should have, but he did. Emma's mind was running several directions at once. How many of them came through? I saw 3, but Hector said they were asking like there were more people involved, like they were gathering information. Emma sat with this. She thought about the envelope Danny had delivered, the gift card, the note. We help because somebody helped us. She'd thought that was the end of it, a gesture complete in itself. She had not imagined it as a beginning. I should call them, she said more to herself than to the old woman. That depends, Mrs. Giordano said, on whether you're comfortable letting people help you. Emma looked at her. Some people aren't, the old woman said simply. Some people would rather manage on their own than owe anybody anything. Even when owing somebody something is just what happens when you live in community with other people. She paused. I've watched you not ask for help for 3 years, Emma. That's a long time to carry things alone. It was the most direct thing anyone had said to Emma in a long time. She didn't argue with it. She called Rita that night after Noah was in bed. Rita picked up on the second ring, which suggested she'd been expecting the call. Heard you had some visitors today, Emma said. We have people who ask questions, Rita said with the practicality of someone who does not see this as remarkable. It's how we figure out what's actually needed versus what people say they need. And what did your people figure out? That your landlord is Roger Lund and that he's giving you 30 days, which means the clock is already running. That your son's medication runs about $400 a month without insurance. That you've got 8 days before the electric gets cut. A pause, Vamaz. That you applied to 2 jobs today, which says something about who you are. Emma felt a strange vertigo. Not the violation of it exactly, but the exposure. Being known this thoroughly by people who had no obligation to know her. I don't want charity, she said. I know if I mean that. I'm not Emma. Rita's voice was patient and firm, at the same time the voice of a woman who has navigated this particular conversation before. Nobody's offering charity. Jack doesn't do charity. What he does is keep track of debts, not financial debts, the other kind. I didn't do anything that put him in debt to me. He sees it differently. A brief pause. You stood up in a room full of people who didn't. That costs something. He knows what it costs because he's been in rooms like that himself more times than he'd count. When someone pays that price without being asked, he doesn't forget it. Another pause shorter. He's also not the kind of person who feels good about watching someone go under when he could do something about it. Emma pressed her hand flat on the table, grounding herself. What is he proposing, she asked. The chapter wants to cover your back rent. Get you current so Lund has no grounds for the eviction. Rita's voice didn't change registers. They want to pay forward 2 months on Noah's prescription. And Danny's got a friend who's an electrician and he can make sure your bill gets sorted. The number was significant. Emma knew without calculating it that they were talking about several $1,000s. Rita, her voice came out strange. That's It's what they can do, so they're doing it. Why? The question landed in a small silence. Because you did something that cost you for people you didn't know without asking what you'd get back, Rita said. That's rare. Jack has been writing for 30 years and he's seen that exact thing happen maybe a handful of times. Her voice lowered not for secrecy but for weight. He lost a friend last year. A man named Donnie who spent 20 years helping people he didn't have to help just because he could. Jack's been looking for ways to keep that going, to make sure that kind of thing keeps existing in the world. Emma sat in the silence of her kitchen for a long moment. She thought about Donnie, a man she'd never met, and what it meant that his absence had sent something rippling forward into her life. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Okay, tell Jack I accept, she paused, and tell him I intend to pay it forward. She heard something in the quality of the silence on Rita's end that she thought might be satisfaction. I'll tell him, Rita said. 3 days later, Jack Harrison himself called. She was at Marcus Webb's office in Beckett, doing her second day of scheduling, working through a backlog of unbilled jobs, with the systematic satisfaction of someone who is genuinely good at organizing things and has been doing it without being paid for years when the phone buzzed. She almost let it go, but she saw Jay Harrison on the screen and she stepped into the hallway. Mr. Harrison? Jack? His voice was the same as she remembered, measured and unperformed. You doing all right? I'm working, she said. That's different from all right, but it moves in the same direction. He laughed short and genuine. Rita says you're stubborn about accepting help. Rita says that about me after knowing me 48 hours. Rita is a fast reader of people. He paused. I wanted to call and tell you myself that there's no string attached to any of this. Some of the brothers want to come out and meet you. That's their business, and I won't force it. But I wanted you to know the offer isn't conditional on you being grateful in a particular way or making us feel good about ourselves. Emma leaned against the hallway wall. Then what is it conditional on? Nothing, he said. It's not conditional. She chewed on this for a moment. That's hard for me to receive. I know it is. Not unkind, not patronizing, just a statement of fact. I've been managing things alone for a long time, she said. Since my husband left, since the situation with the medical stuff started, I got used to being the person who figures things out. That's admirable. It's also exhausting. Yeah, he said it with a weight that meant he understood the specific flavor of it. A silence passed between them, not uncomfortable. Can I ask you something? Emma said. Go ahead. The thing that happened at the diner, you've been refused service before. More times than I can count. So why did this one land differently? He was quiet for a moment, and she had the sense he was actually thinking about it rather than reaching for a ready answer. Most of the time, he said slowly. When it happens, the other people in the room look at their shoes. They're not bad people, most of them. They just don't want to be involved. They've got their own things to worry about. I've accepted that a long time ago. Another pause. But you didn't look at your shoes. And when you spoke up, you weren't doing it to perform anything. You weren't doing it so we'd like you or so you'd feel good about yourself. I watched your face. You did it because it was wrong and you couldn't sit with wrong. He paused once more. That's the thing. That's the thing that's rare. Emma stood in the hallway of Marcus Webb's office building and felt the particular complicated weight of being accurately seen. I should get back to work, she said. Yeah, you should. She heard the smile in it. Tell Marcus he's lucky. I'll tell him you said so. The brothers came on a Saturday, not 12 of them this time, 7. They pulled into her street mid-morning, and Emma heard them coming and went to the front door and watched them park, and Noah came up behind her and looked through the screen. Those are a lot of motorcycles, he said. Yes, they are. Are they here for us? Yes, he thought about this. Why? She thought about how to explain it. She thought about justice and community and what it meant when people chose to show up and what it meant when they didn't. And she thought about whether those were the right words for an 8-year-old on a Saturday morning. Because we helped them once, she said, and they're the kind of people who remember. Noah nodded the way he nodded when something made sense to him fundamentally. That's good, he said. It is, she agreed. She opened the door. Question. Danny was among them. She recognized the canvas jacket and the deliberate calm. He introduced the others, Marcus not to be confused with her new employer. A man called Birch, who was built like a load-bearing wall. two younger riders in their 30s named Cole and Santiago, and a woman Emma hadn't expected introduced simply as Val, who had short silver hair and a no-nonsense quality that Emma recognized immediately because it was the quality she herself aimed for and sometimes achieved. They had brought things, not in a showy way, not laid out for display, just brought in from the motorcycles quietly by people who knew how to do something without making it a performance. Groceries, a new box of Noah's medication. Emma didn't know how they'd known the specifics of the prescription and didn't ask. An envelope from Jack that she would open later, and that she suspected contained the rent money paid directly to Roger Lund's account, because that, it turned out, was what Danny had arranged with the landlord 2 days prior. But they also stayed. That was the part she hadn't anticipated. They stayed for 4 hours. Birch and Cole looked at her car, which had a problem she'd been ignoring because she couldn't afford to not ignore it, and they fixed it in her driveway with tools they'd apparently brought. Danny spent an hour looking at the electrical panel and made 2 calls, one of which she gathered was to the electrician, and the result of those calls was that someone would come out on Monday to deal with the specific issue that had been making the lights in the kitchen flicker for 3 months. Val sat at the kitchen table with Emma and didn't offer advice or pity. She drank coffee and asked questions about the scheduling work for Marcus and what the gas station hours looked like, and whether the school district substitute list was worth being on, and she listened to the answers with the focused attention of someone who is genuinely gathering information rather than waiting for their turn to talk. Santiago took Noah out front and spent 45 minutes throwing a football back and forth with him, which Noah recounted to Emma in extraordinary detail for the rest of the afternoon. Emma moved through all of it with the particular alertness of someone who has not been surrounded by people in a long time and is not entirely sure how to navigate it. She felt grateful and she felt strange about feeling grateful, and she felt something else underneath both of those things that she kept examining when she had a spare second and couldn't quite name. It was only later, after they'd gone, when the house was quiet again, and Noah was telling her more about the football throws, and she was making grilled cheese and half listening and half existing in her own head, that she figured out what the feeling was. It was the feeling of a knot loosening. A knot she'd been so accustomed to that she'd stopped noticing it. The specific physical tension of being a person who is managing everything alone, who holds the full weight of another life in addition to her own, who has not been able to afford the luxury of letting her guard down long enough to actually breathe. She handed Noah his plate and sat across from him and looked at her son eating his grilled cheese with the complete satisfaction of an 8-year-old who has had a football thrown to him by an adult who took it seriously, and she thought, I have not sat at this table without dread in 4 months. She sat at the table without dread. She called her sister in Portland that night. The call went through this time. Emma. Karen sounded surprised and then immediately guilty about the surprise. Hey, I'm sorry I missed. It's okay. I've been meaning to, Karen, it's okay. She meant it. I called because something happened and I wanted to tell someone who knew me before everything. A brief pause. What happened? Emma told her. She told her about the diner and Gary Potts and the $23 and Jack Harrison's note and Rita's call and the people who showed up on a Saturday with groceries and fixed her car and threw a football with her kid. Karen was quiet for a moment after she finished. Are you okay? Karen said, and Emma recognized the question as genuinely open, not rhetorical. I think I am, Emma said. I think for the first time in a long time, I actually am. I should have called more. You should have, Emma agreed without heat. But it's okay. I could send money. I'm going to be okay, Karen. I'm telling you that not because I'm doing the thing where I say it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because things are actually moving in a different direction. She paused. I wanted you to know that. Her sister exhaled something that wasn't quite a word. You scared me, Karen said finally. A while ago when things got really bad, you scared me and I didn't know how to help, and I chose not to know, which is the worst possible version of that. Emma let the admission sit. I know, she said. I'm sorry. I know that too. Another silence, this one gentler. Tell me about Noah, Karen said, and Emma did. Yeah. Monday came. The electrician came, a quiet man named Pete, who seemed to have been briefed on the situation and did not make Emma feel like a charity case, but rather like a client, which was the precise distinction that made the difference. He fixed the flickering lights. He found two other issues she hadn't known about and fixed those too, and told her when he left that the panel was now safe and sound and she should have no more trouble. She shook his hand and thanked him and closed the door and stood in the kitchen and turned the light off and on 3 times just to feel the certainty of it. At noon, Roger Lund called. "Emma?" He sounded like a man who has been surprised by something and doesn't know exactly how to characterize his response. "I got a payment this morning." "I know. 3 months, in full, from a pause. From a Hells Angels chapter operating account." "Yes." I... He stopped, started again. "I want to be honest with you. I was ready to follow through on the eviction. I know you were, Roger. I want you to know that isn't another stop. I'm glad this happened, that you've got people." "Thank you, Roger." She hung up before he could say anything else because she felt the edge of something she didn't want to be emotional about in a phone call with her landlord. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the utility notice and the eviction notice, and both of them were no longer the things they'd been a week ago, no longer live wires. They were pieces of paper. Historical documents of a crisis that was moving incrementally, but genuinely toward a past tense. She sat down and picked up her legal pad and started the week's scheduling for Marcus Webb. She was 3 hours into the work when she got the text from a number she didn't have saved. "This is Gary Potts. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I've been getting calls. People are saying things about me around town that aren't true, and I believe it's connected to your biker friends. I'm asking you to tell them to stop." Emma read it twice. Then she set the phone down and finished her column. Then she picked the phone back up and read it again. She thought about what he was describing. She thought about whether it was true, whether Jack's people had gone around town saying things about Gary Potts, and she thought about what that would mean if they had. She had not asked them to do anything to Gary. She hadn't asked them to do anything at all. She called Rita. "Did your people do something to Gary Potts?" she asked when Rita picked up. A brief pause. "Define do something." "He's saying people around town are saying things about him." "People around town are saying things about him because people around town saw what he did," Rita said. "We didn't have to do anything. We came to Delwood 4 times in 8 days. People notice, people ask questions, people talk." A pause. "We didn't spread anything. His own behavior spread." Emma sat with this. "Is that a problem for you?" Rita asked, and the question was genuine, not confrontational. Emma thought about 3 years of Gary Potts treating the people who work for him the way he treated her. She thought about the things Darlene had told her over months of shared shifts, about the wages he'd held back, about the time he'd docked a dishwasher's pay for breaking a plate. She thought about the look on his face when he'd said, "You are done," like he'd been waiting for the occasion. "No," she said, "it's not a problem for me." "Good," Rita paused. "Don't respond to his text." "I wasn't going to." She put the phone face down and went back to her scheduling work. The text from Gary Potts was not the last she heard from him that week. On Wednesday, she got a call from Darlene. Darlene had worked at the Millbrook Diner for 7 years, which was 4 years longer than Emma, and represented a significantly more advanced degree of resignation. She called in the afternoon when Emma was on her break at the gas station, and her voice had the quality of someone who has been turning a thing over for days and has finally decided to let it out. "Gary's in trouble," Darlene said. "Like real trouble." Emma leaned against the gas station wall. "What happened?" "People have been asking around about him, about the diner. Somebody went and filed a complaint with the labor board about the wages he held back last spring. Somebody else talked to the county about the grease trap situation he's been ignoring for 2 years. A pause. "And 3 people from town went on that local review site and wrote up what happened with the bikers." Emma was quiet. "He's saying it's you," Darlene said. "He's saying you set it all up." "I didn't do anything." "I know that." Darlene's voice was firm. "I know it because I know you, but I wanted you to know he's saying it." "Let him say it." "Emma." "Darlene." She kept her voice steady. "I did not make any of those things true. He held back wages or he didn't. The grease trap was a violation or it wasn't. People saw what they saw with their own eyes in that diner." A pause. "I can't control what he says about me. I can control what I do." Darlene was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I filed one of those labor board complaints." Emma closed her eyes. He owed me $340, Darlene said with the flat certainty of someone who has had $340 owed to them long enough to have memorized the figure. I've been afraid to say anything for 2 years, but then I watched you walk out of there with your apron folded and your head up, and I thought, she stopped. I thought if she can do it with everything she's got on her back, I can do this. Emma stood in the cold outside the gas station and felt the thing she'd been feeling all week, the knot continuing to loosen thread by thread in ways she hadn't set in motion deliberately, but that had started from something she had done. Are you going to be okay? Emma asked. If he retaliates. I talked to a guy, Darlene said, and Emma heard the slight smile in it, a man named Danny, who rides a motorcycle, who says if Gary Potts does anything to create a problem for me, there are people who will make sure the right people know about it. Emma almost laughed. She caught it, but just barely. Danny's a good person, she said. He is, Darlene agreed. He's also very tall. This time Emma did laugh. After she hung up, she stood in the cold for another minute before going back inside, and she thought about what it meant to stand up once and have it keep standing. She'd thought the moment in the diner was finished when she walked out the door. She'd thought she was the only one that had moved. She was wrong about that. And as she stood there and let the cold air fill her lungs and thought about Darlene and $340 and 2 years of being afraid to say anything, she understood something about the nature of what had happened in that room that she hadn't understood before. She hadn't just stood up for 12 bikers who didn't need her to stand up for them. She'd stood up in front of everyone who was watching and hadn't stood up themselves. She'd done the thing they'd wanted to do, or maybe not wanted, but known was right, and she'd done it out loud in public, and then she'd paid the price in public too. And something about watching that happen, watching someone do the right thing and lose everything for it, and walk out with her head up anyway, had done something to the room that didn't end when she left it. She went back inside. She smiled at Tyler behind the counter, who looked at her with the mild confusion of a teenager who doesn't understand why adults smile at each other for no reason. She got back to work. That evening, Noah showed her a drawing he'd made at school. It was a drawing of motorcycles, a long row of them done in crayon, with the cheerful imprecision of an 8-year-old artist, each one slightly different from the last. Some of them had riders' stick figures with helmets that looked like upside-down bowls. One of the figures was clearly female with yellow crayon hair. That's you, Noah said, pointing to the yellow-haired figure. Am I riding a motorcycle? You could learn, he said with complete confidence. She looked at the drawing. She looked at the row of motorcycles in crayon red and blue and black and green stretching across the page like a horizon. What is this for? She asked. Assignment. No. He took it back and looked at it himself. I just wanted to draw it because of what you told me, that we helped them and they remembered. She looked at her son, who was 8 years old and drew motorcycles and threw footballs with strangers, and asked his mother if they were okay with the direct, simple courage of someone who has not yet learned to pretend he's not worried. Yeah, she said. That's right. That's exactly what happened. He carefully rolled the drawing and put it in his backpack, which meant he was going to keep it, which meant it mattered to him. Emma made dinner. She didn't look at the bills while she cooked. For the first time in longer than she could remember, there was nothing on the kitchen table she was afraid to look at. The bills were there. The numbers were what they were. But they existed in the context of a situation that was moving, that had motion and direction, and people in it who weren't just herself. She put plates on the table. She called Noah. He came. They ate. And outside in the quiet of a Delwood, Montana evening, a long row of motorcycles was winding back toward Breckett, headlights on, in the early dark, carrying the specific satisfaction of people who have done what they came to do and know there is more to do yet. The week after Pete the electrician fixed the panel, Emma started sleeping through the night. She noticed it on Wednesday when she woke up at 5:15 and realized she hadn't woken at 2. Hadn't done the ceiling, staring thing, hadn't run the numbers, hadn't lain there in the dark with the full weight of everything pressing down on her sternum like a stone she'd been carrying so long, she'd stopped noticing how heavy it was. She just slept. 8 hours consecutive without interruption. She lay there for a moment and took stock of the feeling and identified it as something she'd almost forgotten existed, which was rest. Real rest, the kind that actually does something for you. Then she got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall where the bills used to be pinned and where now there was just a wall because she'd taken the bills down, because the bills no longer required daily monitoring the way a wound requires monitoring. They were being handled. They were on a trajectory. She had 2 jobs and a third income stream in the form of the substitute list, which had already called her twice. And she had 3 months of rent in the past, and none of the knives she'd been juggling were currently in the air. It was a temporary calm. She knew that. She'd been around long enough to know that temporary calm was not the same as solved, and that circumstances changed direction without announcing themselves first. But temporary calm was what she had, and she was not going to waste it worrying about its temporariness. She picked up her legal pad and started the week. Marcus Webb's contracting operation turned out to be significantly more complicated than he'd made it sound on the phone, in the way that all operations run by people who are very good at one thing, but not at paperwork, tend to be more complicated than they sound. There were 4 crews running across 2 counties, each with their own foreman, each with their own relationship to schedules and timelines, and the specific human quality of promising things they could maybe almost deliver. There were clients who called too much and clients who didn't call enough, and a billing system that Marcus had built himself in a spreadsheet that made Emma's eye twitch the first time she saw it. She rebuilt the billing system in her first week. Marcus looked at it on Friday afternoon and was quiet for a long moment. "You did this in 5 days," he said. "It wasn't complicated, it was just disorganized." "I've had it disorganized for 3 years." "I know." She didn't say it unkindly. "Your third crew is also double booked for the 3rd week of next month. You've got the Hendersons and the county road job running on the same timeline with the same 4 people." He leaned over the spreadsheet. "How did that happen?" "Tommy Reeves told 2 clients yes before checking with you. It's in the email chain from October." She turned the laptop toward him. "I'd recommend calling the Hendersons first because they've been waiting longer and they're more likely to walk." Marcus looked at the email chain, then at Emma, then back at the screen. "You read 3 months of emails in a week." "I needed context." He sat back. "Jack said you were organized." Jack understated it. "Jack doesn't know me that well." He knew enough. Marcus closed the laptop. "I'm going to 20 hours starting Monday, and I'm adding health benefits at 60 days if you're still here." Emma looked at him. "For you and your son," he said matter-of-factly. "It's a small business plan. It's not great, but it covers prescription coverage." She felt the ground shift slightly beneath her in the specific way it shifts when something you've been hoping for without letting yourself hope too hard suddenly becomes real. 60 days, she said. 60 days. She picked up her legal pad. "I'll be here," she said. She told Noah about the insurance over dinner that night. He was eating chicken and rice, which she'd made because chicken thighs were economical, and she was still, even with the improved situation, thinking in terms of what stretched and what didn't. Some habits take longer to unlearn than others. "What does insurance mean exactly?" he asked. "It means the doctor bills get smaller." He thought about this. How much smaller? A lot smaller, and your medicine gets cheaper. He processed this with the focus he gave most practical information. "Is that because of the motorcycle guys?" She paused. "Not directly. It's because I'm doing well at my new job, but," she considered, "the motorcycle guys created the situation where I could get the new job without falling apart first. So in a way, yes." He nodded again. Then, "I want to do something for them." "You want to do something for the Hells Angels?" "They did stuff for us," he said, like this was simple because to him it was. "They did," she agreed, "so we should do something back." He pushed rice around his plate. "It doesn't have to be money. It could be something else. Like I could draw them something." Emma looked at her son. She thought about the rolled-up drawing in his backpack, the crayon motorcycles stretching across the page like a horizon. "That's a good idea," she said. "I could do a really good one, not a quick one." He was already thinking about it. She could see the planning happening behind his eyes. "I'd need the big paper." "We can get the big paper." He nodded, satisfied. He went back to his chicken. Emma watched him and thought about what it meant to raise a child who defaulted to reciprocity, who saw help received, and immediately thought about help given back. And she thought about where that came from and how much of it was just who he was versus how much of it was something she'd done right, and she couldn't separate the two things and eventually stopped trying. It was a Thursday 2.5 weeks after the Saturday when they'd come with groceries and fixed her car when Emma's phone rang with an unfamiliar number and everything stopped being calm. She was at the gas station morning shift, and it was a slow hour, and she answered without thinking much about it because she'd been answering unknown numbers more readily lately since several of them had turned out to matter. Emma Walker. Male voice, not young, formal in the particular way of someone who makes calls like this regularly. Yes, she said. This is Detective Alan Marsh, Cascade County Sheriff's Office. Do you have a moment? Her hand tightened on the phone. What is this about? We're conducting an inquiry into the operations of the Millbrook Roadside Diner, and we believe you may have information relevant to the investigation. We'd like to ask you some questions. Nothing adversarial, he added, and the addition itself made her more alert because people who say nothing adversarial understand that it sounds adversarial. What kind of inquiry, she asked. Financial irregularities primarily. Wage theft complaints, a few other matters. Your name has come up in connection with the period you were employed there. My name has come up as what? A short pause. As a witness, Miss Walker. We're looking into what happened, and from what we understand, you were terminated under circumstances that may be connected to what we're investigating. She thought about Darlene filing the labor board complaint. She thought about Gary Potts's text, people are saying things about me that aren't true. She thought about 3 months of tips that had been calculated mysteriously low, and a uniform allowance that had never materialized, and a back exit she'd been told to use because the front was for customers, and how she'd accepted all of it because accepting things was how you kept a job you couldn't afford to lose. When would you want to talk, she said. Monday morning if that works, our office in Brackett. I can do that. Thank you, Ms. Walker. We'll send a confirmation to the number you're calling from. She hung up. She stood behind the gas station counter with the phone in her hand and thought about what this meant. Not just for Gary Potts, but for her. Because if there was an investigation and her name was in it, that meant this was not over in the quiet, private way she'd been hoping it was over. This was becoming something with a formal shape. She called Rita. Rita's response to the information about the detective was not what Emma expected, which was to say it was not surprise. We know about the investigation, Rita said. Emma went very still. How dear, Danny's been asking around town for 3 weeks. Some of what he found went to the sheriff's office through a third party. A brief pause. Nothing that came from us directly, but information has a way of moving. Rita, Emma kept her voice level with effort. I need to know what your people did. We didn't fabricate anything. Every single thing that went to the sheriff's office was documented fact. Wage records, supplier invoices that didn't match the books, a lease arrangement on the diner building that involved some interesting accounting. Another pause. Gary Potts has been skimming from his own business and blaming shortfalls on employees. That's what the investigation is actually about. The stuff with us was the spark, but the fire was already there. Emma pressed her free hand flat on the counter. Why didn't you tell me this was happening, she said. Because you would have told us to stop. She opened her mouth, closed it. And we weren't going to stop, Rita said without apology but without aggression either. Emma, the man stole money from people who couldn't afford to lose it for years and walked around telling himself he was doing them a favor by employing them at all. He needed to be accountable. That was going to happen whether you were involved or not. I don't want this to blow back on me, Emma said. It won't. You're a witness. You were wrongfully terminated. You're the cleanest person in this whole situation. A pause. Tool Shack wants to talk to you. Tonight, if you're willing. Emma looked at the round station door, the slow morning light coming through it, the ordinary, unchanging surface of a Thursday that had just become something else. Tell him to call me after 8, she said. After Noah's in bed. Jack called at 8:15. Emma was at the kitchen table, which is where she always was, for the conversations that mattered with the mug of tea she wasn't drinking and the legal pad she wasn't writing in. You're angry, Jack said before she could speak. I'm not angry, she said. She stopped, took stock. I'm not in control of something that has my name attached to it, and that's uncomfortable. That's fair. I need to understand what the scope of this is. The scope is Gary Potts facing a wage theft investigation and a financial audit, Jack said. The scope is not you. You were working there legally, you were terminated unlawfully, and anything you tell that detective on Monday is going to support the picture of a business owner who's been running a system that worked for him and nobody else. And your people are just, she searched for the word observers in this. Our people asked questions. People answered. Nothing we asked was illegal and nothing anyone told us was coerced. His voice was patient. Emma, I want to ask you something and I want you to actually hear the question. She waited. Do you think Gary Potts should face consequences for what he's done? She thought about Darlene's $340. She thought about the dishwasher who'd been docked pay for a broken plate. She thought about the uniform allowance that never came multiplied across however many employees over however many years. Yes, she said, then let it happen. You don't have to do anything except tell the truth on Monday. That's all anyone's asking. A silence passed between them. I'm still uncomfortable, she said. I know. A pause. Being uncomfortable and being wrong aren't the same thing. She looked at the legal pad. She thought about that. You're going to have to stop saying things that make sense to me, she said. He laughed, actually laughed the real kind, and she found it disarming because she hadn't heard it before, had only had the measured quality of him, and the laugh was fuller than the measured quality suggested. I'll work on that, he said. She went to Breckett on Monday and sat across from Detective Alan Marsh in a room that smelled like burnt coffee, and she answered every question he asked with the specific precision of someone who has thought carefully about the difference between what she knows and what she suspects. She told him about the uniform allowance that never materialized. She told him about shifts she'd worked where the tip total in the register didn't match what she'd remembered collecting. She told him about the morning Gary had made her sign a paper. She now understood she should not have signed a paper that said she understood her compensation structure, which at the time she'd read as routine, and now she understood to have been a document designed to create a paper trail that benefited him. Marsh listened with the quality of attention that said he was hearing things he'd already suspected and was now having confirmed. Did you keep any records, he asked. Personal records, notes about your shifts, your tips. She had, in fact, kept records. She'd kept them in a notebook she used to log Noah's medication schedule, because she'd learned early on that when you work for someone who doesn't treat you fairly, you write things down. She hadn't known what she was protecting herself against. She'd just known you write things down. She had the notebook in her bag. She put it on the table. Marsh looked at it and then at her. Can I get copies of these pages? That's why I brought it, she said. He nodded slowly. He had the face of a man who has been in law enforcement long enough to have calibrated his expectations low and who occasionally encounters something that recalibrates them. Ms. Walker, he said while the admin was making copies, I want to be clear that you are not under any kind of suspicion. You are a material witness, and what you have given us today is... He paused, choosing the word significant. Are you going to tell me what's actually happening with Potts? I can tell you the investigation is active. I can't give you details. He paused. But I can tell you that what you experienced is not an isolated incident. She thought about Darlene's $340. I know, she said. She called Rita from the parking lot after she left. It went fine, she said when Rita picked up. Good. The detective was professional. She sat in her car, which ran smoothly now, because Cole and Birch had spent an afternoon making it run smoothly. He said what I brought was significant. I'm sure it was. He also said the investigation was active, and Potts isn't the only one he's looking at. There are others involved in the financial irregularities. She paused. He didn't say who. We have some sense of who, Rita said carefully. Is there anything I should know? A short pause. There's a man named Gerald Fitch. He's the diner's primary supplier for most of the perishables. He and Gary Potts have had an arrangement for the last 6 years. Inflated invoices, cash kickback to Potts, the difference absorbed into the diner's operating costs, which means it came out of wages and tips. A pause. Fitch is not a good person. Is Fitch the kind of person your chapter typically has difficulties with? Fitch is the kind of person who has problems with everyone eventually, Rita said. Ours or not. Emma sat with this. Is there any chance this gets bigger than a diner in Delwood? That depends on Fitch and what he decides to do when the pressure gets real. A pause. Jack's been through situations like this before. Not identical, but similar. He says these things tend to either stay small or get big very fast, and there's usually a specific moment when you can tell which way it's going. And we're not at that moment yet. Not yet. Emma started the car. Keep me in the loop. We will. She drove back to Delwood with the particular feeling of someone who has stepped into a current and can feel it moving around her faster than she expected, but has not yet been pulled under. And she held that feeling and examined it and decided that pulled under was not where this was going, that she had too much to hold on to now to let that happen. 2 jobs and a son and a legal pad full of things that were getting done and a prescription coverage benefit 60 days away. She had too much to hold on to. She held on. The moment Rita described the moment when you could tell which way things were going came on a Thursday, 9 days after Emma's meeting with Detective Marsh. She was at Marcus's office when her phone rang with Jack Harrison's name on it, and she answered immediately because Jack did not call midday without a reason. Fitch flipped, he said. She put her pen down. What does that mean? Gerald Fitch went to the sheriff's office this morning, voluntarily with documentation. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, a controlled intensity. He's saying Gary Potts pressured him into the arrangement 6 years ago, that Potts had leverage on him from a previous business deal and used it. He's giving everything over the invoice records, the cash transfers, the whole structure. Emma processed this. Is that true? Which part? The leverage. Did Potts actually have something on Fitch? Or is Fitch creating a story to minimize his own liability? A pause that said Jack appreciated the precision of the question. Probably both, he said. Fitch isn't innocent. But Potts appears to have been the architect. And if Fitch is turning over documentation, the documentation doesn't lie about who set the structure up. So what happens now? Now the sheriff's office has enough for a formal charge. Wage theft's a felony in Montana if it clears a certain threshold. Based on what Fitch is turning over and what your notebook provided, Potts is well over that threshold. Emma sat in the quiet of Marcus's hallway where she'd stepped to take the call. She thought about a morning 3 weeks ago when she'd stood in a diner and said, "You're asking them to leave because of how they look," and Gary Potts had said, "You're done," and she'd folded her apron and walked out. She thought about how that moment had felt final, like a door closing. Is he going to be arrested, she asked. If Fitch's documentation holds up, yes. The detective told one of our contacts this morning that they'd likely be moving within the week. Within the week, she repeated. Yes. She put her free hand on the wall and leaned there for a moment. Jack, she wasn't sure what she wanted to say after his name. She started twice and stopped twice. I don't feel what I expected to feel about this. What did you expect to feel? Satisfied? Vindicated? Something clean? She paused. It's not clean, it's just real. Like something that was wrong is being made less wrong, but it doesn't undo the part where it was wrong. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, it doesn't. Darlene gets her $340 back, Emma said. Eventually, after the process runs. That's something. It's a lot, he said. Gary Potts was arrested on a Tuesday morning, 17 days after Emma's meeting with Detective Marsh. She didn't see it happen. She heard about it the same way most of Delwood heard about it, which was through the particular rapid transmission of small-town information, which travels at a speed that makes the internet look slow. She was at the gas station when Tyler the teenager told her, with the particular mix of shock and glee that teenagers bring to significant local events, that he'd heard from his cousin that Gary Potts had been taken out of the diner in handcuffs at 8 o'clock that morning while 3 customers watched from their booths. 3 customers, Tyler said. Just sitting there eating eggs. Wild. Wild, Emma agreed. She called Darlene at her break. Darlene cried. Not in a dramatic way, but in the compressed, effortful way of someone who has been holding something for a long time and is now releasing it carefully like bleeding off pressure. I didn't think it would actually happen, Darlene said. I know. I thought he'd find a way out. He always finds a way out of things. Not this time, Emma said. Because of you, Darlene said. Because of Fitch turning state's evidence. Because of the labor board complaint you filed. Because you started it, Darlene said firmly. I know you don't want to hear that, but you started it. The rest of us just... A pause. We saw you do it, and then we were less scared. Emma stood outside the wash station in the cold and let that land. I'm glad you're less scared, she said. Are you going to be okay with it going to court and your name in it? I'll be okay. Because if you need anything, Darlene, Emma said it gently, I've got people. A pause on the other end of the line that meant the phrase had landed in a particular way. Yeah, Darlene said softly, I heard about that. What Delwood made of the bikers had been shifting since that first Saturday. Emma was aware of it in the way you're aware of weather, not by seeing the source, but by feeling the effects. People she'd known for 3 years, neighbors, customers from the diner, the woman at the library who'd been helping Noah pick books since he was 6, were saying things to her that had not been said before. Not about the investigation, not about Gary Potts, but about the people who'd shown up. Mrs. Giordano told her that 2 of the chapter members had helped old Howard Briggs get his truck out of the ditch on Route 9 on a Tuesday afternoon. Just stopped and got out and handled it and refused to take anything for the 20 minutes of effort. The woman at the pharmacy told Emma that one of them, the one with the red beard, had paid for a woman's prescription in front of her when the woman's card declined and the woman had been standing there red-faced and crying quiet tears, and he just said, happens to everyone, and walked away. The principal of Noah's school, a careful man named Gerald Oakes, who chose his words the way other people choose in Mishtum and Vitamins, told Emma in the parking lot after drop-off that he'd heard a number of positive things from families in town and wanted to know if she'd be willing to speak to some of the parents about the situation. Speak to them about what, she asked, about what you know of this organization. There are people in town who are still operating on assumptions that don't match what they're observing. Emma thought about this. I'm not their spokesperson, she said. I understand. I'm not asking you to be. He paused. I'm asking you to be yourself, which is from what I can observe someone people listen to. She thought about Jack saying you did something that cost you for people you didn't know without asking what you get back. She thought about it in the context of Gerald Oakes calling her someone people listen to. Let me think about it, she said. He nodded. Of course. She drove to Marcus's office and thought about it for most of the morning while she rebuilt a project timeline that Tommy Reeves had managed to make 4 days longer than it needed to be. She thought about what it would mean to stand up again in a different room and say things that might be heard differently by people who had assumptions. She thought about how the first time she'd stood up, she hadn't planned it. It had just been the thing she couldn't not do. She picked up her phone and called Principal Oakes and said she'd do it. The meeting was on a Friday evening at the school. 11 parents came, which was more than Emma had expected, given that it hadn't been widely announced, just a word-of-mouth thing that Gerald Oakes had described as an informal conversation. They sat in the library in chairs that were slightly too small for adults, and Emma stood at the front of the room and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was calm. Not the forced calm of someone managing their nerves. Actual calm. The calm of someone who knows their material and has nothing to perform. She told them the story. Not a shaped, smoothed version of it, but the actual story with the $23 and the broken zipper wallet and Noah asking, are we okay? And herself saying yes into the dark of his room. She told them about the diner and Gary Potts's face and the apron folded once precisely and set on the counter. She told them about Jack's note and Danny in the driveway and Val at the kitchen table drinking coffee and asking real questions and listening to real answers. She told them about Pete, the electrician, and the lights in the kitchen she turned off and on 3 times just to feel the certainty. She told them all of it. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when people are actually absorbing something rather than waiting for it to end. A man in the back raised his hand. He was someone she recognized vaguely, a contractor she'd seen at the hardware store. You said they fixed your car, he said. Yes. Did they ask for anything in return? No, Dee. Did they expect anything? She thought about Jack's letter. We help because somebody once helped us. She thought about what Rita had said about debts that weren't financial. They expected me to keep being the person I am, she said, which isn't a transaction. It's just an understanding. The man nodded slowly. A woman near the front, who Emma knew as the mother of one of Noah's classmates, said, Aren't you worried, having that kind of connection? Emma looked at her. When I had $23 and a sick kid and an eviction notice and no job, she said carefully. Nobody in Delwood knocked on my door. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I understand why. People have their own lives. They have their own things. She paused. But the people you're asking me to be worried about came with groceries and a gift card and a note that said they weren't there for anything except to help. So no, I'm not worried. Another silence. An older man in the third row, someone she didn't recognize, said, "They got a bad name." "Yes," she said. "Some of it earned over the years, some of it not." She looked at him directly. So did poor people. So did single mothers. So did a lot of people who turned out to be something different than their reputation when you actually met them. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Down. After the meeting, standing in the parking lot while the parents filed out, Principal Oakes came up beside her. "That was well done," he said. "I just told the truth." "That's usually the hardest thing," he said. She got in her car and drove home and picked up Noah from Mrs. Giordano's and listened to him tell her about the book he'd been reading, something about a town that solved mysteries, and she made exactly the right amount of interested noise in exactly the right places and navigated the familiar dark roads home and felt the day settling behind her like sediment. At home, before she turned the lights off, she went to the refrigerator where Noah had taped the finished version of his drawing, the one he'd done on the big paper he'd requested. It was a proper effort, not a quick drawing, but a considered one. The row of motorcycles was longer and more detailed than the school version. The figures on them had faces now rudimentary but intentional. The yellow-haired figure was there again, but this time she wasn't alone on the motorcycle. There was a smaller figure behind her arms, out like someone riding in the back. Noah had drawn himself into it. Emma stood in her kitchen in the quiet of her own house with the electric lights burning steady and the refrigerator humming and the furnace running and the mortgage equivalent of her rent paid for 3 months and a prescription coverage benefit 42 days away and her son asleep down the hall, and she looked at that drawing for a long time. She thought about what it meant that her 8-year-old son drew himself into the story, not as a bystander, not watching from the sidewalk, arms out, present. She thought about what it meant to be the kind of mother whose kid did that. She turned the kitchen light off. She went down the hall. She paused at Noah's door and listened to him breathe in the specific way he breathed when he was really deeply asleep, slow and total and without reservation. Then she went to bed. She slept 8 hours. She did not wake at 2. The 42 days passed the way days pass when you are finally genuinely busy in a direction that matters, which is to say they passed fast and with purpose, and she barely felt them go. Marcus Webb's operation with Emma's rebuilt scheduling system in place ran cleaner than it had in the 3 years before she arrived, and Marcus said so directly, which was the kind of feedback she'd stopped expecting from employers, and which landed with more weight than she showed him. The gas station hours filled the mornings. The substitute list had called her 4 times. She was running at a pace she recognized from the years before the money got bad, and the worry got constant, and she'd been grinding down to the bone just to stay in place. Except this time the pace was moving her forward rather than just keeping her from falling. Noah's prescription coverage kicked in on the 61st day because Marcus's benefits administrator was one day slow, and Emma did not say a word about it because she understood that some things you absorb without complaint. The cost per month dropped from $411 to $62. She paid the first $62 bill sitting at her kitchen table, and she sat there for a moment after she clicked the payment through and felt the specific private satisfaction of a number that is simply less. That is manageable. That is the kind of number ordinary people pay without thinking about it, and that she would now, for the first time in 2 years, pay without thinking about it either. She called Noah in from the living room. "What?" he said in the distracted tone of a kid who's been pulled away from something. "Your medicine is $62 now." He looked at her. He processed the number. He had been present in this house long enough to understand what numbers meant in the context of other numbers. "Is that good?" "That's very good." He thought about it. "Can we go to the lake?" She laughed before she could stop herself. "Yeah, bug, we can go to the lake." He went back to what he'd been doing with the calm satisfaction of someone whose primary need has just been met, and Emma sat at the kitchen table and let herself feel the things she'd been not quite letting herself feel for 6 weeks, which was that they were going to be okay. Not probably, not if things held. Actually, genuinely, sustainably okay. The wall where the bills used to be pinned had been bare for weeks now. Gary Potts' first court date was on a Wednesday in late November. Emma didn't go. She'd been told by Detective Marsh that her testimony would not be needed at this stage, that this was a preliminary hearing, and the documentary evidence was sufficient to proceed. And she was grateful for that because she had a Tuesday afternoon with Marcus and a Thursday morning at the gas station and a substitute call she was hoping would come through on Friday, and she had stopped organizing her life around Gary Potts weeks ago and intended to keep it that way. But Darlene went. Darlene called her from the parking lot afterward with a specific energy of someone who has witnessed something they'd been told to expect but didn't quite believe until they saw it. He looked small, Darlene said. Gary? In there, in the courtroom. He had a lawyer, nice suit, the whole thing, but he looked... She paused, searching for it. He looked like what he is, which I know sounds obvious, but I've been watching that man act like he owns everything and everyone for 7 years, and in that room today, he just looked like a man who got caught. Emma leaned against the hallway wall at Marcus's office. How did the preliminary go? They're moving forward. Full trial probably spring. The judge said something about the documentation being... She stopped. What's the word for when evidence is overwhelming? Compelling. Yeah, compelling. That's what she said. A pause, followed. Fitch was there. He didn't look at Gary once, not once the whole hearing, just stared straight ahead. What did Gary do? He looked at his hands. Another pause, this one with the quality of something Darlene was deciding to say. He looked at his hands, and I thought about all the times he signed those checks that were wrong by $30, $40, $100, and handed them to people who needed every cent. And I thought about how he must have done it without looking at them either. Just looked at his hands, signed, handed it over. Emma was quiet. I'm glad I went, Darlene said. I needed to see that he was real, that he wasn't... She stopped again. I had him so big in my head for so long. You know, I know, Emma said. He's not big. He's just a man who took things that weren't his. That's most of it, Emma agreed. She went back to the scheduling and didn't think about Gary Potts for the rest of the afternoon, which was, she reflected, exactly the right amount of time to spend on him. The call came on a Thursday morning 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. She was between a gas station shift and her drive to Breckett when her phone buzzed with Jack Harrison's name, and she answered in the parking lot with the engine running. You have a minute, he said. I have about 12. I need to be in Breckett by 10. This won't take 12. A pause that was different from his usual pauses, slightly heavier. I need to tell you something about the situation with Potts, and I want to tell you directly before you hear it another way. She turned the heat up. Tell me. Fitch gave a full deposition last week. In the deposition, he named a third party, someone who facilitated the initial arrangement 6 years ago, someone who connected him and Potts in the first place. Who? Jack said a name she didn't recognize, Robert Crane, and then he said what Robert Crane was, which was a county commissioner who had been in office for 9 years. Emma's hand tightened on the wheel. A county commissioner, she said. His name is attached to the 7 other businesses in the county that have wage and tax irregularities. Fitch says Crane approached him, said he knew a diner owner who needed a supplier relationship and was open to creative accounting, and made the introduction, in exchange for what Fitch described as ongoing consideration, meaning Crane took a cut, meaning Crane facilitated corruption for people who paid him to facilitate it, Jack said, and has been doing so according to what Fitch is claiming across a range of businesses in 2 counties for the better part of a decade. Emma sat with this for a moment. This is bigger than I thought, she said. Yes. My name is in the original investigation. As a witness, nothing changes about your status. His voice was deliberate. But I want you to know that what started at a diner in Delwood is now a corruption investigation involving a sitting public official. And that means attention. Press possibly, certainly more investigators. A pause. I want you to be prepared for people asking questions about you. What kind of questions? The kind that try to find out if you're the kind of person whose word can be trusted? The kind that look for reasons to discount what you've said. He said it straight without softening. It's not personal. It's just how these things work. When the investigation gets to someone with power, the people connected to it get scrutinized. Emma thought about what scrutiny of her looked like. A single mother, 2 jobs, 3 years at a diner, a school district substitute list. a broken zipper wallet, and a son who drew motorcycles on big paper. A connection to a Hells Angels chapter that most people in the county had an immediate and not entirely favorable response to. They're going to try to make the bikers the story, she said. A pause that confirmed she was right. Someone might try. And by extension, try to make me the story. The woman who got fired and then used her biker connections to take down the man who fired her. That's the version someone might try to sell, Jack said, especially if Crane has allies who want the investigation discredited. She pressed her hand flat on the steering wheel. Does it affect the case, she said, the actual documentation, the wage records, my notebook, Fitch's deposition? Does any of that change? No, evidence is evidence. Then the version someone might try to sell doesn't matter. Another pause. You're being very calm about this. I'm being practical about it, she said. I'll be calm later. A pause. Is there anything I need to do differently? Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Go to work. Take care of your son. Tell the truth when you're asked. He paused. And don't respond to anything in the press if it comes to that. Let the facts respond. Okay. Emma. He said her name with the weight he sometimes put behind it when he was about to say something he'd chosen specifically. You did not cause this. You walked into a situation that already existed, and you did one decent thing, and the structure that was already rotten underneath started to collapse from its own weight. You didn't make it rotten. You just refused to pretend it wasn't. She sat with him that for a moment. I need to drive to Breckett, she said. Yeah, go. Thank you for telling me directly. Always, he said. She put the car in drive. The press came on a Monday. Not the national press, not yet. Not the kind of press that sends cameras and wants footage. The local press, which in 2-county rural Montana meant a newspaper that published 3 times a week and a regional news website that got enough traffic to matter. The newspaper ran a piece about the investigation into Gary Potts and Gerald Fitch. And the name Robert Crane appeared in it, carefully worded as someone whose name had emerged in the course of the investigation and who had not been charged with any crime. The regional site ran something faster and looser with a headline that said, Biker Involvement in Corruption, Investigation Raises Questions. And Emma read it on her phone in Marcus's hallway and felt something between anger and exhaustion. The piece was not explicitly about her, but it mentioned the original incident at the Millbrook Diner, and it mentioned that a Hells Angels chapter had become involved in the situation in Delwood, and the structure of the piece, the way it ordered information, and the questions it raised without answering them, implied a connection between the bikers and the investigation that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. She called Jack. I saw it, he said. Is that Crane's people? Almost certainly. The reporter on that piece has done favorable coverage of Crane's office for the last 4 years. His voice was even. It's a shot across the bow. They want to see if we react. What do we do, Buena? Nothing, he said. Nothing public. I've already talked to our lawyer, and he's talked to the investigators, and the investigators are aware that this kind of pressure campaign sometimes happens when a politically connected target feels the walls closing in. People in Delwood are going to read that piece. People in Delwood already know what happened, he said. They saw it. They know who showed up and what they did and what kind of people they've been dealing with. A website article doesn't undo 3 months of reality. She thought about Mrs. Giordano, about Howard Briggs's truck, about the woman at the pharmacy whose card declined, about 11 parents in a school library listening to Emma tell the truth without notes. Okay, she said. Okay, I trust you on this. A brief silence that felt like something passing between them. That means something, he said quietly. I know it does, she said. Don't waste it. No. The person who called her about the article was the last person she expected. Karen. Her sister called on a Tuesday evening, and Emma heard the particular tightly controlled quality in her voice that meant Karen had been thinking about something for long enough that it had started to pressurize. I read something online, Karen said. The regional site piece. Yes. A pause. Emma, are you sure about all of this? The bikers? The investigation? Karen. I'm not trying to... Karen. Emma said it with the patience of someone who has had this conversation in her head several times and knows where it ends. I am sure. I have been sure. I was sure when I had $23, and I'm sure now that I have 2 jobs, and insurance coverage, and 3 months of paid rent. The situation has changed in my favor entirely because I did something right and the right people responded to it. I'm not going to be unsure now because a website article questions the optics. A brief pause on Karen's end. I just worry. I know you do. That's okay. Emma's voice softened. I've had more people worrying about me in the last 3 months than in the 3 years before that combined. I've had to get used to it. People worry about you because you matter to them. I'm aware of that now, Emma said. It took some adjusting. Karen laughed, which was the sound Emma had been working toward. How's Noah? Karen asked. He wants you to come visit. He's been telling his friends his aunt lives in Portland, which apparently has enormous credibility on the playground. I could come at Christmas, Karen said. If that's... Yes, Emma said before the sentence finished. Come at Christmas. So, the twist that changed everything came not from the investigation, not from the press, not from Gary Potts or Gerald Fitch or Robert Crane. It came from a woman Emma had never met, and it came on a Tuesday afternoon that had given no indication of being anything other than a Tuesday afternoon. She was at Marcus's office when his desk phone rang. He was out on a site visit, and she answered it because she always answered it when he was out. Web contracting, she said. Is this the office for Marcus Webb? A woman's voice, not young, careful. It is. Marcus isn't in right now. Can I help you? My name is Patricia Hollis. I'm a reporter with the Montana State Press. I've been covering the Potts-Fitch Crane investigation since it became a state-level story last week. A pause. I'm trying to reach Emma Walker. I was told she works here. Emma sat back in her chair. This is Emma Walker, she said. A brief pause from the other end, the pause of a journalist recalibrating. Ms. Walker, thank you for answering. I want to be transparent with you about what I'm working on and what I'm hoping you might be willing to share. Go ahead. The piece I'm writing is about the investigation itself, but specifically about how it started. How a complaint about wage theft at a single diner in a small town connected to a sitting county commissioner and became a multi-jurisdictional inquiry. Patricia Hollis had the voice of someone who had been doing this for a long time and knew how to be direct without being aggressive. The narrative that some people are trying to establish is that the Hells Angels chapter orchestrated the investigation for their own purposes. I don't think that's accurate, and I think the actual story is more interesting. What do you think the actual story is? Emma asked. I think a woman with nothing left to lose stood up for the right reason in a room full of people who didn't, and the consequences of that single act traveled further than anyone expected. Emma was quiet. Will you talk to me? Patricia Hollis said. She thought about Jack saying, let the facts respond. She thought about this being a different category. Not a regional website with Crane connections. A state press reporter who'd already framed the story in a way that was, as far as Emma could tell, accurate. When, she said, I could come to Delwood tomorrow. Emma looked at Marcus's calendar on the wall. I can do 11 o'clock. There's a diner in town. She stopped. There's a coffee shop on Main Street, Ardell's. I'll be there at 11. I'll find it, Patricia said. Thank you, Ms. Walker. Call me Emma, she said. She hung up and sat for a moment and then picked up her phone and called Jack. State press reporter wants to talk to me, she said when he answered. Patricia Hollis, she blinked. You know her. She called our chapter 2 days ago. She's legitimate. She's been covering state-level corruption for 12 years. A pause. I told her if she wanted to talk to you, she should contact you directly and let you make your own decision. Emma absorbed the fact that he'd been managing this situation for 2 days without telling her, and then absorbed the further fact that he'd specifically refrained from managing her decision about it. Both things were true simultaneously. I said yes, she told him. Good, he said. Anything I should know before I talk to her? Tell the truth, the whole truth in the order it happened. Don't editorialize. Don't make us sound like heroes and don't make Potts sound like a cartoon villain. Just say what happened. A pause. The truth of what happened is better than any version anyone could construct. That's what I know how to do, she said. I know, he said. That's why I told her to call you. Patricia Hollis was 53 years old, which Emma registered immediately because it put them in different positions. Emma 9 years younger. Patricia, from the world of credentials and press passes and 30 years of navigating powerful people's attempts to manage narratives. She wore her gray hair loose and had the kind of face that had made peace with every year it had collected. And she sat across from Emma at Ardell's with a recorder on the table and a notebook open, and she looked at Emma with the kind of attention that said she was genuinely here to listen. "Start wherever feels right," she said. Emma started with the wallet, the broken zipper, the rubber band from a bunch of broccoli, the $23 arranged on the kitchen table 4 different ways, and always $23. She talked for 54 minutes. She knew it was 54 minutes because she could see the clock behind Patricia's head, and she watched it the way she watched all numbers automatically from habit. She told it the way she told it to the parents in the school library, the whole thing without smoothing with the $23 and the broken zipper wallet and Noah asking, "Are we okay?" in his darkroom, and herself saying yes and meaning maybe, and then later meaning it for real. Patricia did not interrupt. She asked 3 questions in 54 minutes. All 3 of them were about Emma's state of mind at specific moments: when she stood up in the diner, when she got the note from Jack, when Detective Marsh called, and none of them were the questions that were designed to lead a witness somewhere. They were genuinely open. At the end, Patricia put her pen down. She looked at Emma for a moment. "Can I ask you something off the record?" She said. "Yes." "Are you afraid of what this might still become?" Crane has resources. His allies have been trying to muddy the water since his name appeared. Your connection to the Hells Angels chapter will be used by some people to discredit you. Emma looked at her directly. "You know what I was afraid of 3 months ago?" she said. "I was afraid of the electric being cut off. I was afraid of losing the apartment. I was afraid my son was going to ask me one more time if we were okay, and I was going to have to look him in the face and either lie or tell the truth, and neither was survivable." She paused. "I am not afraid of Robert Crane." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook. "Thank you," she said. "This is going to be an honest piece. I can't promise it won't cause you problems, but I can promise it will be honest." "That's all I need," Emma said. Darn. The piece ran the following Monday. It was long. 1,200 words with a photograph. Emma had agreed to a photograph taken outside Ardell's by a photographer who came separately, and a headline that read, "One woman, one act, and the corruption case nobody saw coming." Emma read it at the kitchen table before Noah woke up. It was accurate. Every detail, every quote, every sequencing of events was accurate. Patricia had taken the 54 minutes of conversation and found the spine of it and told it straight. The bikers were present in the piece as they were present in the story, as people who responded to something real with something real. Gary Potts was present as what he was. Robert Crane's name appeared exactly where it belonged in the sequence, connected to what the evidence connected him to and nothing more. Emma appeared in it as herself, a woman with a broken zipper wallet and a child and $23, and a decision she made in a room full of people who didn't make it. She put the phone down. She got up and made coffee. She made Noah's oatmeal with brown sugar, the real kind. She woke him up and he ate, and she got him to school and walked to the gas station and took her position behind the counter and waited for the day to be whatever it was going to be. By noon, the piece had been shared 1,100 times. By 2 o'clock, Tyler, the teenager, came over to her side of the counter and showed her his phone with the expression of a kid who has witnessed something that exceeds his framework. "You've got like 8,000 likes on that photo," he said. "That seems like a lot," Emma said. "That's a lot," he confirmed. Her phone had been buzzing steadily since 9. She'd silenced it. Marcus called at 2:30 and told her to take the afternoon, which she declined because the Hendersons needed their timeline updated by 4. She updated the Henderson timeline. She drove to pick up Noah. She answered the phone 3 times, Jack Karen, and a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be a producer from a regional television station asking if she'd be willing to do an interview. She said she'd think about it. She told Noah about the article at dinner. "Is that the one with the motorcycle picture?" he said. She looked at him. "How do you know about it?" "Tyler's cousin showed it to some people at school. Mrs. Patterson mentioned it this afternoon." He was entirely matter-of-fact about this. "She said you were brave." Emma set her fork down. "What did you say?" she asked. He shrugged the specific shrug of an 8-year-old who does not understand why adults are interested in what he says. "I said you were just being you." She looked at her son. She thought about everything that had moved since the morning she'd stood in a diner and said, "You're asking them to leave because of how they look." She thought about the distance between $23 and here measured not in money but in what had changed in and around her in the town, in the investigation, in the people who'd been afraid to say things and had stopped being afraid, in the woman at the pharmacy, in Howard Briggs's truck, in Darlene's $340, and Patricia Hollis's 1,200 words. She thought about what it meant to raise a child who called bravery just being you. "Eat your dinner," she said. He ate. She picked her fork back up and ate with him, and the evening went on. The way evenings do with dishes and homework and Noah's ongoing serial account of the book about the mystery-solving dog, and Emma listened and responded in the right places, and the hours moved in their ordinary, reliable way toward night. After he was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table. She picked up her phone. She scrolled through the notifications she'd silenced all day with the practiced efficiency of someone sorting signal from noise. 14 interview requests, 22 messages from numbers she didn't have, save some supportive, some not, most just people who had read a thing and felt compelled to respond to it. An email from Detective Marsh saying the investigation had opened a formal inquiry into Robert Crane as of this morning, moved up from the originally anticipated timeline. She read that one twice. Then she opened a new message to Jack. "Did you see Marsh's email?" she wrote. His response came in under a minute. "Yes." Did the article accelerate it? "Probably. Attention changes timelines." She looked at the screen. "This is getting very large," she typed. "Yes," he wrote back. "Are you okay?" she asked. A pause longer than his other responses, long enough that she looked up from the phone and looked at the wall where the bills used to be, and then back at the phone. "I'm okay," he wrote finally. "Are you?" She thought about the honest answer. She thought about the wallet with the rubber band around it, which was still the same wallet because she hadn't gotten around to replacing it, and also because it had become a thing she was keeping now deliberately like evidence. She thought about the lists she'd written the night everything started. 11 items, all of them crossed off now. She thought about Noah's voice. "She was just being you." "Yes," she typed back. "I'm okay." She put the phone face down on the table. She sat in her kitchen in the quiet of a late night in Delwood, Montana, with the electric burning, steady and no bills on the wall, and a subscription coverage card in her wallet next to a rubber band and $23 that had long since become other things. And she sat there and let the full weight of the last 3 months come to rest in her. Not crash down, come to rest, like setting down something you have been carrying a long way. The investigation was real. The accountability was real. The people who had shown up were real. The woman who had stood up in that diner was real. And she was still her, and she was still in this kitchen. And the thing that had started from one decision, made without planning, in a room full of people who didn't make it, had grown into something that had a shape she couldn't fully see yet, but could feel the outline of, could feel it the way you feel. Something large moving in the dark. Something that is going somewhere. She turned the light off. She went to bed. She slept through the night. The television interview request she'd been sitting on it for 4 days finally got an answer on a Friday morning, and the answer was no. She'd thought about it carefully, the way she thought about everything, carefully running it from every angle, the way she'd run those $23 across the kitchen table looking for the version where the math came out differently. And every angle brought her to the same place, which was that she had told her story to Patricia Hollis because Patricia Hollis came to tell it straight, and that was enough. A television interview was a different thing. A television interview was lights and framing and the specific way a story gets shaped when it needs to fit into 4 minutes between a weather segment and a car dealership ad. And her story did not fit into 4 minutes, and she was not going to let it be made to fit. She emailed the producer a polite decline. She CC'd no one. Then she drove to Breckett and did her work. Marcus noticed she was quieter than usual that morning, which meant he'd been paying attention more than she'd realized because Marcus Webb was not a man who typically registered emotional weather in the people around him. He came into the office at 10:30 with 2 coffees and set one on her desk without asking and said, "You doing all right?" in the direct, unornamented way he said most things. "I'm doing fine," she said, "just calibrating." "Calibrating to what?" She looked at him. "To things being okay. I'm not used to it yet." He sat down across from her in the chair that was usually for clients and held his coffee with both hands. "My mother used to call it waiting for the other shoe," he said. "That's exactly what it is." "It gets better," he said. "The waiting. After a while, you start to believe the shoe might not come." Emma looked at him. He was a man she'd known for 3 months who had given her work and benefits and treated her like a professional from the first day, and she realized she'd been so focused on doing the job that she hadn't thought much about what kind of person that took. It took a specific kind of person. The same kind that called a stranger because Jack Harrison said she was organized. "Thank you," she said, "for the job, for what it's done for us." He waved it off in the way of someone uncomfortable with gratitude. "You rebuilt my entire billing system in a week. I should be thanking you." He stood up. "Also, you found the double booking with the Hendersons before I lost a $20,000 contract." "So," she almost smiled. "So," she agreed. He went back to his side of the building. She went back to work. Soon. The call from Detective Marsh came on a Wednesday, 10 days after the article ran, and 4 days after she declined the television interview, and it carried a different quality than his previous calls. Something that she registered before he said a single substantive word. The quality of someone who is delivering information they're allowed to deliver rather than information they're required to hold back. "Ms. Walker, I wanted to update you directly before you see anything in the press." She closed Marcus's billing software. "Go ahead." Gary Potts entered a plea agreement this morning. He's pleading guilty to 3 counts of felony wage theft and 2 counts of financial fraud. In exchange, he's providing full cooperation with the investigation into Robert Crane. She was quiet for a moment. "He's cooperating," she said. "Fully. He has documentation going back 8 years. The arrangement with Crane was more extensive than what Fitch described. There are 7 other businesses in the county involved." Marsh's voice was professionally neutral, but she could hear something underneath it, the specific satisfaction of an investigator whose case has become larger and solider than it started. "Crane will be formally charged within the next 2 weeks. His office is aware this is coming." "What happens to Gary?" "He'll serve time. The plea reduces the exposure significantly, but there's mandatory minimums on the felony counts. He's looking at 18 months minimum." A pause. "The wage theft restitution is part of the agreement. Current and former employees will receive what they're owed with interest." Darlene's $340. Emma pressed her hand flat on the desk. "How many employees?" she said. "We've identified 41 current and former workers with outstanding claims. The total restitution figure is just over $60,000. $60,000 that had been taken from 41 people who needed it the way she'd needed the $23 on her kitchen table, one small piece at a time. A skim tip here, a docked hour there, accumulated over years into something enormous. "Thank you for calling me directly," she said. "You started this," Marsh said, and there was no ambiguity in his voice about what he meant by that. "You deserve to hear it first." She thanked him and hung up and sat in Marcus's office for 60 seconds, doing nothing. Then she called Darlene. Darlene answered on the first ring, which suggested she'd been expecting the call, which meant the news was already moving through Delwood at its customary speed. "You heard," Emma said. "Roger Haley's wife works in the courthouse," Darlene said. "I heard 20 minutes ago." A pause. "Emma, I know. $60,000. I know. All those people." Darlene's voice had the particular texture of someone holding several large feelings at once and not sure which one to let out first. "People I worked with for years, people who went home with short checks and didn't say anything because they needed the job. People who—" She stopped, started again. "Clara Reyes worked there for 4 years. She's got 3 kids. She told me once that she'd miscounted her tips when actually she hadn't miscounted anything. She just didn't want to make trouble." Emma thought about Clara Reyes. She had a vague face in her memory, a woman who'd worked the morning shift, quiet, reliable, always first to help when it was busy. "Clara's going to get what she's owed," Emma said, "because of you." "Because Gary Potts made a deal to save himself," Emma said, "and because Fitch cooperated, and because you filed the labor board complaint and the other employees came forward and Marsh's office did their job, and because you folded your apron and walked out," Darlene said firmly. "Don't do that thing where you distribute it so thin that your part disappears." Emma was quiet. "Your part doesn't disappear," Darlene said. "It's the first part. Everything else is downstream of it." Emma sat with that. "Thank you, Dar," she said. "I'm coming to Ardell's tomorrow," Darlene said. "I want to sit across from you in person and say this to your face. 9 o'clock. "I'll be there," Emma said. She called Jack that evening. He already knew. Of course he already knew. She'd stopped being surprised by the speed at which information reached Jack Harrison. She'd come to understand that he existed in a network of people who kept track of things, not for any sinister purpose, but because that was the nature of a chapter that had been operating in a state for decades. A network of people who knew each other and communicated and kept each other informed. And in that network, information moved the way it moved in Delwood, but faster and with more reach. 41 employees, she said. 60,000 in restitution. His voice held what she now recognized as his version of satisfaction, which was measured and quiet but present. Crane's being charged. 2 weeks. Our lawyer confirmed it this afternoon. Emily looked at the wall that used to have bills on it. A county commissioner, she said. 8 years of this. Power that goes unchecked tends to run in the same direction indefinitely, Jack said, until something stops it. I didn't stop it, she said, and this time she wasn't deflecting, she was being precise. I just created a situation where it could be stopped. That's all anything is, he said. A silence that had become comfortable between them over the months, the silence of two people who have run out of need to fill the space. I want to do something, Emma said, for the 41 people, for the community, I guess, something real, not a gesture. She paused. I've been thinking about it since Marsh called. I know what I want to do, but I need to know if it's crazy. Tell me. She told him. The silence that followed was longer than usual. Then that's not crazy, he said. It's a lot of work. Yes. It would take everything I've saved and more. Yes. And it might not work. A lot of things that work look like they might not before they did, he said. How long have you been sitting on this? Since the night the article ran, she said. I've been running the numbers for 2 weeks around, and the numbers work. The numbers work if I do it right and don't do anything stupid. You don't do stupid things, he said. I do occasionally. Name one. She thought about it. She couldn't name one quickly enough to be convincing, which was itself a kind of answer. Well, your chapter helps, she said. Not financially. Labor and knowledge. If I need people who know how to fix things. You know the answer to that. I want to hear you say it. Yes, he said. We'll help. She looked at her legal pad. There was a new list on it, a different kind of list from the ones she'd been making, not a survival list, but a building list. She'd been making it for 2 weeks in the margins of the work she did for Marcus in the evenings after Noah was in bed, in the 15 minutes between gas station shifts when she sat in her car in the parking lot with the heat running. Okay, she said, then I'm doing it. She told Noah on a Saturday morning, which was the morning they finally went to the lake. It was December now, cold in the specific Montana way that is different from other cold, dry, and sharp, and with a quality of clarity. And they sat on the old dock with their coats on, and Noah had a cup of hot chocolate she'd made in a thermos, and Emma had coffee, and they looked at the water, which was still and pale, and caught the winter sky the way cold water does. I'm going to open a restaurant, she said. Noah turned to look at her, not surprised exactly. 8-year-olds who pay attention develop a sense for when something is coming. Like the diner. Not like the diner. Nothing like the diner. She held her coffee with both hands. A real place. A good place where people are treated right. The workers and the customers both. She paused. The Millbrook building is going to be empty once the county seizes it as part of Potts's plea agreement. There's a process for community groups to bid on those properties. Marcus knows about it. I've been looking into it. Noah was quiet for a moment, processing. He was like her in that way, took information in and held it before responding. She'd noticed this about him and took a private pride in it. That's Gary's old place, he said. Yes. You want to take his building? I want to put something good in his building, she said. Something that wasn't there before. Noah looked at the water. What would you call it? She smiled. She'd been waiting for him to ask that because she'd already decided and she wanted him to be the first person she told. The 23, she said. After the $23. He looked at her. So people remember, she said, that it started from almost nothing, and that almost nothing isn't the same as nothing. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said with the complete seriousness of someone making a considered assessment, That's a good name. I thought so too. He went back to his hot chocolate. She went back to her coffee. They sat on the dock together in the winter cold and watched the still water, and neither of them said anything more for a long time. And the quiet between them was the best kind of quiet, which is the quiet between people who are comfortable enough with each other to not need to fill it. The bid process took 6 weeks. Marcus, Marcus helped her with the paperwork, which was considerable, and called in a favor with a lawyer he knew in Beckett, who handled commercial property transactions and who did the work at a rate that was significantly below market, because, as the lawyer put it, he'd read Patricia Hollis's article, and he had a daughter about Noah's age. Emma accepted the reduced rate without arguing, which was evidence of how much she'd changed in 4 months, because the Emma of 4 months ago would have argued. The county received 3 bids for the Millbrook property, a regional chain restaurant, a storage facility company, and Emma Walker doing business as 23 LLC, with a proposal that included a community employment initiative and a commitment to fair wage practices and a letter from Marcus Webb, attesting to her organizational competence, and a separate letter from Jack Harrison that Emma never read because Jack sealed it before he gave it to her and said, "This one's between me and the county." She didn't ask what was in it. The county chose 23 LLC. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, and the woman from the county property office said the words in a businesslike way that didn't match what they meant, and Emma said thank you and hung up and stood in Marcus's hallway and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Then she called Jack. "We got it," she said. She heard something in the silence that followed, not words, just the weight of a man who has been through enough to know what this kind of moment costs and what it means when it comes. "Good," he said, finally. "Good." The chapter came in February, not 12 this time, not the Saturday group of 7. They came on a Saturday that Emma had been told to keep clear by Danny, who called 2 days before and said to have coffee ready, which she'd taken to mean a small group. She made 2 pots. She stood at the window of the Millbrook building, hers now legally, officially on paper, and heard the sound before she saw them, that deep rolling thunder that she associated now not with intimidation, but with arrival, with the specific feeling of people coming toward you who intend to be useful. She counted. She lost count at 30 and started again. She lost count again at 50. She gave up counting. There were more than 100. She found out later the final number was 212. Riders from the Montana chapter and 3 neighboring state chapters. People who had heard the story through the network, who had read Patricia Hollis's piece, or heard it from someone who had their own reasons for wanting to put their hands to something that meant something. They filed into the Millbrook building and they looked at what was there, and then they went to work. Emma stood in the middle of it and watched 200 people move around her with the organized efficiency of people who have done physical work their whole lives and know how to read a space and figure out what it needs. And she felt something she couldn't fully contain, a feeling too large and too specific to have a simple name, something that included gratitude and wonder, and the specific disorientation of a person who has spent years being invisible, suddenly being very, very visible. Val found her standing in the middle of it. "You're going to cry," Val said with the directness that Emma had come to love about her. "I'm not going to cry," Emma said. "You're already doing the face." "I don't have a face." "You have a face," Val said. "It's okay, nobody's watching." Emma looked around at 200 people actively watching. "Okay," Val conceded. "They're watching, but nobody's going to make a thing of it." Emma pressed her fingers to her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then she straightened up and went to find out where she could be useful. Jack was in the back supervising a group of 4 who were working on the kitchen infrastructure, which needed more than any other part of the building. He had a clipboard, which Emma had never seen him carry before, and he was pointing at things with a pencil and talking to a man in work clothes who appeared to be an actual licensed contractor rather than a writer. "Eddie's got his crew on the kitchen," Jack said when Emma came up beside him. "Licensed, insured. Marcus found him." "Marcus found him. Marcus knows everyone in 2 counties who builds things," Jack said. "Turns out." Amaya looked at Eddie's crew moving through the kitchen with the precise focus of professionals. She looked at the riders throughout the building, 100 and more people giving a Saturday to a restaurant they had no stake in for a woman they'd met because she'd done the right thing in a diner 3 months ago. "Jack?" She said his name and then didn't immediately say the next thing because the next thing was large and she wanted to say it right. "I want you to know that I understand what this is, what you've built, the kind of people you have around you." She looked at him. "I had no idea this was in the world. I had no idea people chose to live this way." He looked at her with the gray eyes that had been the first thing she'd noticed about him, sharp and calm and collected. Most people don't, he said. They see the vest and they see a headline from 30 years ago, and they decide they know. I was one of those people, she said, before the diner. I won't lie about that. I know. A pause. That's part of why what you did mattered. You saw something wrong and you acted on it, even with the assumptions you had. He held her gaze. That's harder than acting on it when you already think well of someone. She thought about that. There's a table from the back of the diner, she said, changing direction the way she did when something landed too squarely to look at head on. An old wooden one. I want to keep it. Put it by the window. Put a plaque on it. He raised an eyebrow. It says 23, she said. The table number. It was always table 23. She paused. I didn't notice that until after I got the building. It felt like something. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said, it is something. Charm. The 23 opened on the first Saturday of April. Emma had thought about whether to make it an event, had weighed the options with the same systematic attention she applied to Marcus's scheduling and her own bills, and decided that an event was the wrong word for what it should be. It should just open. The door should unlock at 7 in the morning because that's when the first customers might reasonably want coffee, and the coffee should be ready, and the food should be good. And the people who worked there should be paid what they were owed, and then some. She had hired 7 people. 3 of them were former Millbrook employees, Darlene, who had asked about a position 3 days after the county awarded the building, and Emma had said yes before she finished asking. Clara Reyes, who Emma had tracked down through Darlene, who was now working mornings and whose 3 kids had, according to Darlene, heard the story of the restaurant approximately 400 times. A young man named Patrick, who had washed dishes at the Millbrook for 8 months and been dock paid twice, and who came to the interview with his hands in his lap and his eyes slightly down, the posture of someone who had been conditioned to expect the worst and who left with a better posture and a start date. The other 4 were people from town who needed work. She had interviewed 11 people total. The 7 she chose were the 7 who, when she asked them what they wanted from the job, gave her answers that were about the work itself and not about what the job would look like on a resume or whether there was advancement potential. She hired people who wanted to work. That was the whole criterion. On the morning of opening day, she was there at 5:30, which was earlier than necessary, and she sat in the empty restaurant in the quiet of a Saturday morning before anyone else arrived, and she looked at the space. Table 23 was by the window, the old wooden one with a small brass plaque screwed into the surface that said, "This is where it started. April 4th, $23. She had not hired anyone to design the plaque. She'd had the hardware store in Delwood make it a man named Joseph who did custom metalwork and charged her $40 and did it beautifully. She sat at table 23 by herself in the empty restaurant in the early morning, and she put her hands flat on the wood, and she thought about the morning she'd counted $23 4 different ways on a kitchen table, looking for the version where it was enough. She thought about the apron folded once precisely set on a counter. She thought about a parking lot in November cold and a man with gray eyes who said, "What you did was something." She thought about Rita's voice at 10:45 at night, asking if there was anything she needed. She thought about Darlene's $340 and Clara Reyes miscounting tips she hadn't miscounted. She thought about Noah asking, "Are we okay in the dark?" and herself saying yes and not knowing yet if it was true. She thought about 212 riders on a February Saturday, filling a building she'd won in a county bid, putting their hands to something that mattered. She thought about the things that had moved from a single act in a single room, the 41 employees and their $60,000, the county commissioner facing federal charges, Fitch's deposition and Marsh's investigation, and Patricia Hollis's 1,200 words. She thought about the school library and 11 parents in Gerald Oaks saying someone people listened to in a parking lot. She thought about her sister coming at Christmas and staying for 10 days and helping paint the restaurant walls a color they'd chosen together while Noah told them the entire plot of the mystery-solving dog book in installments. She thought about all of it the way you think about a road you've traveled, looking back at the distance, not with relief exactly, but with something more solid than relief. The understanding that the road was real and you walked it, and here you are. Darlene arrived at 6:15 with a key Emma had given her 2 weeks ago and pushed through the door and saw Emma sitting at 23 and said without surprise, "I figured you'd be here." Couldn't sleep. Same. Darlene tied on her apron, the new one navy blue with the 23 in white letters across the front. She looked at it when she'd tied it and smoothed it down once with both hands. My apron fits better than Gary's ever did. I bought real sizes, Emma said. Revolutionary, Darlene said, and went to start the coffee. Clara arrived at 6:30, Patrick at 6:45. By 6:55, all 7 of them were there, and the kitchen was running through its morning startup, and the smell of coffee had reached every corner of the building, and the table 23 plaque caught the early light coming through the window and threw a small gold reflection on the floor. At 7 o'clock, Emma unlocked the front door. The first customers were already there. Not a line exactly, just people. Mrs. Giordano with her cane standing nearest the door. Roger Lund behind her, which surprised Emma, and then, on consideration, didn't. Several faces she recognized from the school library meeting. Howard Briggs, who Emma had never actually met, only heard about through Mrs. Giordano's account of his truck, a large older man, who nodded at her with the solemn appreciation of someone returning a favor. And behind them, parked along the curb in the cold April morning, 6 motorcycles. Danny, Birch, Val, Cole, Santiago, and one more, the red-bearded man from the original 12, whose name Emma had finally learned was Thomas, who had asked if the pancakes were made from scratch or from a mix and ordered them anyway when she said mix. Thomas was first in line behind Mrs. Giordano. "We heard you've got real pancakes now," he said. "Made from scratch," Emma said. "I'll take 3, he said. She laughed. She stepped back and held the door and let Delwood come in. Jack arrived at 9:30. The restaurant had been running for 2.5 hours by then, and the rush of first-day curiosity had settled into something that looked, Emma thought with private amazement, like the natural rhythm of a functioning business. Tables occupied, coffee moving, the sound of people talking at a volume that meant they were comfortable not performing. Darlene was moving through the room with the ease of someone in the right place doing the right thing. Clara at the counter was precise and warm in equal measure, which was exactly what Emma had hoped for when she hired her. Patrick in the back had found his footing faster than she'd expected and was running clean. Jack came in without fanfare and found a stool at the counter, and Emma poured him coffee without being asked because she'd poured him coffee enough times now to know he took it black and wanted it immediately. He looked around. He took his time with it the way he took his time with most things, not rushing the observation but letting it settle. "This is good," he said. "It's the first day," she said. "Ask me in 6 months." "I will," he said. She leaned on the counter across from him. The restaurant was doing its morning thing around them, and she let it happen while she looked at the man who had written her a letter about a debt that wasn't financial. "I've been thinking about Donnie," she said. He looked at her. "Rita told me about him, the man who spent 20 years helping people and who you lost last year." She held his gaze. "You said you were looking for ways to keep what he did going, to make sure that kind of thing kept existing in the world." A brief pause. "I said something like that. I want you to know that it's in here," she said, "in this place. What he did, that quality of choosing to help without keeping score, that's what I'm trying to build in here. Not because it's good marketing, because it's right." She paused. "So whatever Donnie started, it's in this room. You can tell him that if you talk to him somehow." Jack was quiet for a moment. She watched something move through his face, something he didn't usually let move through his face in visible ways. He pressed his hand flat on the counter, briefly, the way she'd pressed her hand on things through the winter, grounding herself against the size of feeling. "I'll tell him," he said. Emma straightened up. "I've got tables," she said. "Go," he said. She went. The lunch rush surprised her. She'd budgeted for a slow first week, which was what Marcus's research suggested was normal for a new restaurant, and the lunch rush that arrived at noon was not a slow first week lunch rush. It was a full restaurant, every table, a short wait, Darlene running at a pace Emma recognized from the best Saturdays at the Millbrook, the pace that hurts while you're in it and feels like something when you're done. Emma was everywhere. Counter tables, kitchen when Patrick needed a second set of hands back out counter again. She moved the way she'd always moved, boussoid, when the work demanded it efficiently and without drama, and she found in the movement the specific joy she'd felt in good work since she was young, the joy of a body and mind engaged with something real. At 1:15, in the brief gap between the main rush and the stragglers, Darlene found her in the back and said, "Table 12 wants to see you." Emma frowned. "Is there a problem?" "No problem." Darlene had a look Emma couldn't read. "They asked for you specifically." She went out. Table 12 was three women she'd never seen before. Mid-40s to early 60s, she guessed, though she had always been unreliable at estimating ages. They had the manner of people who'd driven some distance to be there. "Emma Walker," the nearest one said. "That's me." "We drove from Billings," the woman said. "We read the article in December. Patricia Hollis's piece." Emma waited. "We've been waiting for you to open," the woman said. "All three of us. We had it marked on our calendars." She paused and something in her face shifted, something personal and large coming to the surface. "I'm a single mother, 2 kids. I've been in situations—" She stopped, collected herself. "I wanted to come and eat here because I wanted to tell you that what you did changed the way I think about what I'm able to do in my own life." Emma stood at the edge of table 12 and felt the familiar sensation of something too large to hold comfortably. "I just told the truth," she said, "in a room where it cost me something." "That's all it takes sometimes," the woman said, "for someone to see that it's possible." Emma looked at the three women who had driven from Billings with the restaurant marked on their calendars and felt for the first time with real clarity the full scope of what had moved from that November morning. Not just the 41 employees and their restitution and the county commissioner in legal jeopardy and Gary Potts's guilty plea and the building she'd bid on and won. But this, the women at this table. The thing that travels when a person does something real and it gets told truthfully by someone who knows how to tell it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for being here," the woman said. Emma nodded once. Then she asked them what they wanted and wrote it down on her pad and went back to the counter and kept working. At 4 o'clock, when the afternoon had settled and the dinner prep was starting, and the last of the lunch customers had gone, Emma took 10 minutes on the front step. She sat on the step in the April cold and looked at the street and thought about November and the walk home in the cold and the $23. She reached into her pocket out of habit and felt the wallet. The broken zipper wallet still held together by a rubber band. She'd bought a new one in January and had never transferred her cards over because she'd kept not getting around to it and eventually realized she was not getting around to it on purpose. She was keeping the wallet. Noah had asked her why once, and she'd told him it was to remember where they started, and he'd said with the serious consideration he gave most things that it was like a trophy, and she'd said yes, exactly. It was exactly like a trophy. She turned it over in her hands now. The rubber band was the same one from the broccoli. She'd replaced it once when it snapped, and then replaced the replacement with an identical one because it seemed important that it be the right kind. She was aware this was slightly irrational and had decided she was fine with that. The front door opened behind her. Noah. He'd come after school with Mrs. Giordano, who had stayed for coffee and pie and stayed longer than she'd intended, as people tended to do. He came and sat on the step beside his mother and looked at the street with her and was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was thinking about something specific. "How was it?" he said. "The first day." "Good," she said. "Really good." He nodded. He leaned against her, the specific weight of an 8-year-old leaning into a parent automatic, unconscious, completely trusting. "The pancakes were good," he said. "I had 3. "I know, I saw." "Thomas had 3 too." "I know, I made them." He laughed. She felt it against her side. They sat together on the step of the 23, and the April afternoon did the things April afternoons do in Montana, the light going long and gold across the street, the air cold but not biting the town, going about its ordinary business around a building that used to be one thing and was now something else. "Mom," Noah said, "Are we okay?" She put her arm around her son. She thought about every time he'd asked her that in the dark of his room, across the kitchen table, in the quiet of difficult mornings. She thought about every time she'd said yes and measured the distance between the word and the truth. She thought about the night she'd said it and known for the first time with her whole self that it was simply solidly true. She looked at the street in front of the 23, at Thomas's motorcycle parked at the curb, at Mrs. Giordano's car, at the empty tables inside that had been full for 6 hours and would be full again tomorrow, at the plaque on table 23 catching the afternoon light. "Yes," she said, not because it was what Mother said, not because it was easier than the truth, Because it was the truth, complete and unqualified and earned, built from $23 and one act of courage and 200 writers and 41 people getting what they were owed, and a brass plaque and a rubber band and the specific grace of people who show up when nobody else does. Emma Walker held her son in the April light outside the restaurant she built from almost nothing. And she knew the way, the things that have been tested and proven and paid for in the hardest currency, that they were not just okay. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. And that was more than enough. That was everything.